For our book club today, we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglas was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, top of the Thursday morning to you. Usually on Wednesdays we have Middays with Mark, but he will be with us in just a moment today on our program for the full hour, taking your calls. But I wanted to give you the lineup for the day also. In our third hour, I want to dig into this. Are you feeling COVID safer? There's some estimates that as many as 75 to 80% of Americans may now be immune or have some level of immunity. I'll do a deep dive on that in the third hour. Also, why our Supreme Court needs to be expanded to be saved. Gorsuch has gone off the deep end again. I'll tell you about that in our third hour. In our second hour, I want to do a deep dive into why we need to listen to Canada about having a single national elections agency. We are pretty much the only developed democracy in the entire world that doesn't have federal standards for elections. We need to do that. I'll get into that in the second hour of the program. Also, Bishop William Barber is going to be with us in the second hour. He's the pastor of the Greenleaf Christian Church, senior lecturer at the Repairers of the Breach, architect of the Forward Together moral movement, and we'll be talking with him about that. But it's our first hour, and with us for that hour is our old buddy, Congressman Mark Pocan. He's the former co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. He's still a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He's also on the Appropriations, Education, and Labor Committees in the U.S. House. His website is pocan.house.gov, P-O-C-A-N. And you can tweet him at Rep, as in Representative, Rep Mark Pocan on Twitter. Congressman, welcome back to the program. I'm curious, what's on your mind? What do you see happening, that you want to be sure to tell our listeners about and things like that? And also, I noticed that your brother, I didn't know anything about this. Your brother is a judge, and he's up for a federal judgeship. And all of a sudden, and Ron Johnson had helped put, he was one of 4 names that Ron Johnson had signed off on to send to the Biden administration, but now Ron Johnson is suddenly going, oh, wait a minute, I didn't mean that. So I'm curious your thoughts on that, if consequential here.
Well, I'll tell you what is consequential about it is this is the first of a purple state, where you've got a Republican senator not putting a blue slip in on a judge who is eminently qualified. Now, yes, he's my brother. I may be biased, but he's the deputy chief judge in Milwaukee County, so he's in a leadership role over there. He got a unanimous, well-qualified rating from the American Bar Association to be a federal judge. He was put forth by Tammy Baldwin and Ron Johnson as 4 names recommended to the president. The president selected my brother, and 7 o'clock the night before the hearing, Ron Johnson put out a statement saying he won't back him because, one, he's not from Green Bay, which doesn't matter because it's the entire eastern side of Wisconsin. It's kind of a false flag. But then a really false flag because he talked about a case that happened in Waukesha where someone on low bail went through a parade and killed a number of people. It's a case that my brother has nothing to do with. He hasn't been in criminal court since 2017. And then they brought up a case where there was a $5,000 bail, and he's using that as the reason. But, Tom, here's what's really interesting. Whoever dug the dirt up didn't dig deep enough to actually have all the facts for Ron, because it was a case where someone had a $2,500 signature bail, which just means if they don't show up, they say they'll pay the money. He did some crimes. My brother then came into the case at that point, and the prosecution said, can you raise it to a $5,000 cash bail so that we can make sure we're prosecuting him? He did just that, exactly what prosecution wanted. The guy didn't get out of jail, and then he got sentenced to, I think, 8.5 years. So it worked exactly as Ron Johnson would want it, but Ron put up a really false flag about this thing that, again, my brother had nothing to do with a case that Ron's actually wrong on the actual facts. So we think it's probably something else. You know, you never know with Ron Johnson.
Like he's your brother?
Well, or that he would be the first out gay federal judge from the state of Wisconsin, I think is another thing that we're not sure if that might be what it is. But, you know, Dick Durbin's been very clear. If a blue slip isn't returned because of someone's race or gender or sexual orientation, they may have to figure out a way around this blue slip rule. And again, the blue slip rule is nothing more than something informally senators have kind of abided by off and on. They don't in all judgeships. So we're hoping that Ron Johnson will realize that he got, you know, hoodwinked with whatever information he had, and he would do the right thing, call my brother, apologize, and say, yes, I support him moving forward. But if that doesn't happen, I think, you know, we're going to be looking closely at not just Wisconsin, but other states where you may have a Republican who puts up opposition. This one is just so odd because Ron Johnson actually said, I recommend this person, and then now is like, you know, kind of in a weird position of trying to explain why he doesn't and the reasons he put out there don't work.
Now that the right-wing commentators are trashing him. It's amazing. I should add, by the way, I should have said at the very beginning that you're with us for the hour taking calls at 202-808-9925. That's amazing. And we did notice during the Trump administration that on a couple of occasions, Mitch McConnell was ignoring that blue slip rule. When Democratic senators tried to object to right-wing wackadoodles that they were trying to put on the courts, he just said, screw that, we're going to ignore it. So,
and Dick Durbin has been pretty clear in the last 48 hours saying, look, I've said all along, and he has said it all along, if someone is simply objected to because of race, gender, or sexual orientation, and in this case, you know, I was actually told, and I told my brother how boring he is, it was one of the lamest FBI files ever they've had on someone because, you know, my brother's pretty boring, bluntly. You know, there's no reason to object. And, you know, in this case, this might be exactly where they look at this and maybe any other instances and say, look, this isn't right. This is, you know, we've always kind of gone along with the judges, especially after you've recommended someone. So we'll see what happens. But the White House is sticking there. And, you know, Tammy Baldwin's been awesome, as she always is. But, again, it just shows that, you know, there's always some other motives sometimes people have. And, you know, if it's simply because of who you love, then that would be a really awful reason and you have to stand up against that. Or if it's some other reason, we need to figure that out. Yeah,
it seems to me like bad faith, if nothing else. Was there anything else or anything that you wanted to just start the hour with? Comments, notes, you know, on what's going on in Congress or anything?
Yeah, just briefly, we're not in this week or next week fully. This is a committee week right now, so I've had committees. And then next week, traditionally, we've been gone President's Week. But, you know, we've got a deadline coming up on our budget that was supposed to be done last year, September 30th. The good news is it does look like Senate Republicans are working with people like Rosa DeLauro, who's the head of the Appropriations Committee, and hopefully we'll have that done by mid-March. But it's important because, you know, just continuing a Trump budget when you have a Democratic House, Senate, and President, when funding would go into very different priorities, it's important we get this done.
Yeah, I get it. And there was some talk about the Marsha Blackburn holding up the continuing resolution to continue to fund the government, which I guess runs out on Saturday of this week, over the fact that that in the budget is this little $30 million thing to provide, you know, clean syringes and rubber mouthpieces for crack pipes, so that addicts don't end up infecting each other with HIV and hepatitis C. Apparently that's a bad thing in Republican world. They want more infections, but is she still doing that? Do you know?
I think at the end of the day, these kind of things, I mean, Mitch McConnell, to his credit, has at least said, you know, this is something we've got to get done. If you don't have the U.S. government, you know, functioning, you know, you may have extremists like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene saying shut it down, but I think everyone else understands the devastating impact it would have, not just on the economy, which is why some people want to do it to hurt Biden and Democrats politically, but also on, quite honestly, a lot of big companies and big donors. And I think that ultimately makes Mitch McConnell probably want to do the right thing. Yeah,
I totally get it. Okay, let's pick up some phone calls here.
Sure.
Pat in Phoenix, Arizona, you're on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Yeah, hi, Tom and Mark, Congressman Pocan. I just got a question. I'm a military retiree, and I've been covered by TRICARE, and it covered my wife and myself for $50 in pretty good care. You know, when I joined, the recruiters, promised free medical care for me and my family for life and blah, blah, blah. And then, it became, well, you got TRICARE you got to pay into, and you got co-pays, so that's fine. But now I just turned 65, and I had to sign up for Medicare. And I'm not even covered by TRICARE. Well, TRICARE turns into a supplemental coverage, but my costs for me and my wife now turned up to $200. And so, that's kind of a lot of money for a retiree. And I just kind of think there should be some kind of, coverage for TRICARE that I could have kept. And that was just my comment.
Thank you, Pat.
Sure. No, I hear you. I think, on the broader question, Pat, is, we need to do some just reform to Social Security. We have to make sure it's fully funded, but also we should do other modernizations. And, John Larson of Connecticut has a bill that would do just that, would have actually a bigger increase for seniors based on the consumer price index for seniors who spend more money on medications than they do on things like gasoline. And all of that should happen, and we need to probably lift the cap of where we stop collecting taxes on those who are wealthy. I think it's around 140,000, give or take 5,000 right now, so that you could actually have money coming back into the fund, and some of that would address maybe the copay and other issues.
It's 16 minutes past the hour. Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program, Thursday edition. Yes, we are live. It is Thursday. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your phone calls. We'll be back with more of your calls for him in just a moment. His website is Pocan, POCAN.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep Mark Pocan, and we will be right back with your calls for Congressman Pocan.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls for the Congressional Progressive Caucus's Congressman Mark Pocan, right on the other side of this break. And welcome back. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Lord Mark Pocan, good day to you both. As you can tell, I'm a student of Thom Hartmann University, and the tuition are free. And I really think that we're becoming a constitutional monarchy with the court being the monarch. My question is, what's the consensus about increasing the Supreme Court to balance out the court? Because there's going to be a lot of decisions that are going to affect the country moving forward. Thank you.
Yeah, Omar, that's something that I believe Mondaire Jones, I'm not sure who in the Senate, I think there's a senator who's the lead on that side, but Mondaire Jones from New York is the leading person I know advocating for this, has a bill introduced. I'm a sponsor. The Congressional Progressive Caucus has endorsed the bill. And you're right. I mean, we need to continue to evolve like that court has evolved, as our country needs to evolve. And part of that is by adding seats. And there's also a bill, I believe, that Ro Khanna has that limits the terms, how long you can be in the Supreme Court. Personally, I think the size one would actually address the problems the most, and I think that's why there are a number of organizations and members of Congress strongly behind that concept.
Nancy in Woodland, California, watching on Free Speech TV. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, my question actually touches a little bit on what the representative said a few minutes ago to the first caller, but I just wondered what the status is on getting Social Security Administration and the IRS fully funded and staffed again so they can operate as they used to. Thank you.
Yeah, Nancy, that's part of what we're trying to do. So this continuing resolution we've been living on for a few months after our fiscal year ending September 30th, I think there's a very good chance that we'll have it done by mid-March because Senate Republicans are working with us right now. We actually have top-line agreement on numbers. Now we just have to allocate it. But that's the thing. Under Donald Trump, he killed so many agencies by not funding them that you didn't have them doing their core missions. And now we're trying to rebuild them under the Democrats and under the Biden administration. And that's part of why you will see more money going to them under a real budget bill as opposed to a continuing resolution. So even though it's wonky, and I'm a little wonky because I serve on the Appropriations Committee, so I follow this very close, it really is important. I have always thought, since I've been in local government and in the state legislature as well as Congress, you best show your values by where you put your money. And that's why, it really is important when we talk about things like budgets and appropriations, because words are nice, but they don't necessarily put food on the table.
Congressman, we're down to 45 seconds. This is an extension of Reagan's starve the beast strategy, is it not? David Stockman came up with that phrase, but they all proudly embraced it, which is you cut funding for government agencies, in this case the Social Security Administration, the Medicare folks, and the Internal Revenue Service. You cut funding to the point where their service just becomes crappy, and then you scream about the crappy service and as an excuse to try to privatize the agency or even kill it off altogether. I mean, Trump offered early retirement to 10,000 Social Security employees.
Yeah, add the Postal Service to that list, right?
Yeah.
That's the same thing we've seen under DeJoy, and you're exactly right. That's why, when Democrats are in charge, we start putting funding back in. There's a lot of revenue we can raise for a very small cost by adding IRS agents, and that's not going to go after 99%, probably 99.5% of your listeners. It's going to go after the people who make a lot of money and the corporations that hide their money overseas, people who should be paying more.
Yeah, amen. Amen. Yeah, they're not even auditing super rich people anymore because they can't afford to do it, which has got to be exactly the way the billionaires like it, eh?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we will be right back. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. I should have said they're not, as aggressively auditing. I'm sure they're auditing a few. We'll be right back. Stick around. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. Hey, just wanted to flag for you this amazing study that came out of the Department of Global Public Health at the University of Bergen in Norway. Lars Fadnes is the professor who oversaw it. They took a massive database of millions and millions of people all around the world, and the goal was to look at life expectancy. And they were looking at everything from pollution to wars to poverty to diet. And because there was so much data and such a large population base, they were able to separate out individual pieces. And what they found, and just looking at the diet piece of this, what they found was that going with what you and I might call the Mediterranean diet, they don't call it that in the study. What they basically say is no red meat, very little dairy, lots of fish, nuts, legumes as the principal protein sources, and lots and lots and lots of fresh fruits and veggies would add 10 years of lifespan to the typical 20-year-old and 8 years of lifespan to the typical 60-year-old. The whole video about it is over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back, Congressman Mark Pocan, taking your calls for the hour. And Will in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Will, what's up? You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Representative Pocan. I think that the Democrats could avoid what I think is going to be the coming 2022 midterm massacre if they were to either have Biden cancel student loan debt or get that 2006 horrible bankruptcy law changed so that students of all ages, including me, who's 65, who has $200,000 in student loan debt, that we can discharge that debt via bankruptcy. Either one of those actions would save the Democrats and I think would actually ensure that they would have a gigantic victory. That's my opinion. So what do you think about that?
Sure. Well, I mean, I agree with you. I think that we do need to be looking at canceling student debt, and I think the president talked about a certain amount when he was running. I think part of the difficulty has been, we've been largely focused on things like Build Back Better, which have a cost, and I'm not sure how that's coming back or not from the Senate. I do think, though, there are two things that are probably overriding that are hurting us the most. One is the COVID hangover. People are just tired of it 2 years later. And even though Joe Biden didn't create the problems that clearly Donald Trump did, he's paying that price. And secondly, inflation. And again, that actually goes back to COVID, because when we reopened kind of last year all at once and all those supply chains weren't ready for it, You've seen a lot of scarcity that drives costs up. And even though January had the same inflation rate as December, a flat inflation rate, which is good, we still are seeing it in the energy and food sectors. And that's what people buy in grocery stores and pay for their gasoline. So they're visibly seeing it. 30% of inflation is attributed to car prices because of computer chips. And that's why we passed the Competes Act to really work on that. So I think if we can come out of COVID, which I think we are right now, in between March 1st and Easter, I think is around the time that we're going to be in the best place we have been for 2 years. That's great news. And then also we're hearing by summer, it looks like inflation should be largely under control. Then people will listen to us on a lot of other things because we did some great bills last year with the American Rescue Plan and the infrastructure bill. But you're right, we should do it. I think the biggest problem we have right now is people aren't really listening real closely because of the COVID hangover and inflation.
Mark in Sauk City, Wisconsin. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Yeah, thanks. And hello, Mark. I used to see you all the time when I walked the square when I worked downtown. But I called Ron Johnson's office. I was surprised to actually get a live person yesterday and avoided using the expletives that were built up in my mind over his treatment of your brother, that for his judgeship, that it's just reprehensible that Ron Johnson goes and shifts position. And you mentioned that blaming your brother for the Waukesha tragedy where the guy was let out. I mean, that Ron Johnson once again has shown that he has no core beliefs other than he's a political animal that just wants to survive, and that I think using your brother's judgeship as for part of that is just feeding his base, and it just goes another indication just how reprehensible the man is. I mean that it's sad that rather than debating real issues like the racism that still exists in our country.
Mark, we just have 30 seconds. Yep. Is there a question there for the congressman?
No, I mean that is. I just don't know what more we can do than call Ron Johnson and tell him, change your mind. But I do not think Ron Johnson is going to change his mind unless he's forced to do so.
Let's toss that to the congressman. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just on the 30,000-foot level, this is why I think every week I recommend people reach out to your House members and your senators because it's important they get calls on whatever the issue is being heard. In this particular case, I think the most ironic thing, Mark, is that if you don't have a judge in that position, you could have someone get away with something while they're on hold rather than being prosecuted, causing the very problem he claims he's trying to solve.
Yeah. Should we be calling, or should the caller, Mark, should he be calling Chuck Schumer's office and say ignore the blue slips?
Chuck Schumer and Dick Durbin are the key folks on that, but I think they're looking at this in very good faith because they don't want people thrown aside for reasons like discrimination or anything else.
Yeah, I get it.
Call 202-808-9925.
It's Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with him in just a moment, right after this break here at the bottom of the hour. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by John Pavlovitz. It's titled, If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk, Finding a Faith That Makes Us Better Humans. This is from the introduction titled, You Had One Job. If you want a good laugh, Google the phrase, you had one job. The results are a hilariously tragic parade of seemingly impossible fails, unfathomably poor planning, and face-palming inducing human error. A piece of melted cheese on top of a fast food burger bun. The word stop misspelled on a street crossing. A keep to the right sign with its arrow facing left. A toilet lid inexplicably installed below the seat itself. It's strange stuff. Seeing these stupefying train wrecks and task execution tends to elicit two responses. Usually making you feel a little bit better about yourself while simultaneously wanting to track down the culprits in an effort to understand how they managed to neglect the primary duty assigned to them. We begin to speculate. Were they temporarily distracted? Did they not properly comprehend the instructions? Did they feel as though someone above them in the chain of command dropped the ball? Were they just plain lazy? When people miss the point so spectacularly, we want to know how and why. Because that kind of failure feels impossible from the outside. It seems unfathomable to get the main thing wrong, and seeing it happen sparks our curiosity. I imagine Jesus knows well the curiosity that comes with watching people give clear direction lose their way. As a longtime Christian by aspiration, if not always in practice, I often envision an exasperated Jesus coming back and the first words out of his mouth to his followers as his feet hit the pavement being, "You had one job, love. So what happened?" I wonder what massive wave of excuses and rationalizations would come flooding from the mouths of the faithful multitude in front of him, how they might justify their mistreatment of the assailed humanity in their care, the verbal and theological gymnastics they'd attempt to avoid culpability for their own cruelty. Would they stridently recite him a verse from Leviticus? Would they blame the liberal media for morally corrupting America? Would they talk about people's wicked lifestyle choices? Would they argue that they were loving the sinners in their midst, but simply hating their sin? Would they frantically offer up the same platitudes and parrot back the same partisan talking points that they've gotten used to brandishing on social media and proffering in Sunday school classes? And if all else failed to convince him, would they quote Jesus to himself in a desperate Hail Mary effort to pass the buck to him for what they did or failed to do while supposedly standing up for him? And there, fully seen in the piercing gaze of the namesake of their very faith tradition, with all their justifications and excuses exhausted and only their fully exposed hearts left, would any of their responses be sufficient reasons for refusing to love? When that was the singular task and primary commandment that he left them responsible for tending to? In my less compassionate moments, I admit that I like to picture it not going well for them. I know it's far less than admirable, let alone Christ-like. But some days my heart strangely warms at the possibility of a few billion brimstone-breathing evangelists, sanctimonious conservative politicians, and plank-eyed judgmental Christian neighbors all having to explain themselves in a sanctified flop-swept moment they can't exegete or gaslight themselves out of, and they all get what they have coming to them. But my self-righteous revelry doesn't last long. The mirror calls me out as I remember what I think I know about Jesus, and that rescues me from full-blown, unabated hubris. I begin to wonder what my excuses might be, how I'd spin the enmity I manufacture here, what story I'd come up with for not doing the one task we both know compromises a disciple's job description. And if I really believe what I'm supposed to believe, are any of my justifications sufficient? If God is love, and if Jesus is the perfect expression of that love, and if I'm supposedly trying to follow that Jesus, how could I be so love-impaired so frequently? How do I miss the singular point so consistently? It's not as if I didn't know what I was signing up for, like some lengthy online user agreement I blindly accept in haste, missing the bombshell fine print underneath. Having read the Gospels a few million times, give or take a few 100,000, I know the primary commandment is not something I need to excavate from cumbersome layers of foreign language translations and cultural mores of the time. Jesus himself clearly laid out the most important commandment for me and for everyone who's ever cracked open a Bible, and even most people who've never cracked open a Bible. And so we'd all understand what's being asked of us going in, so there would be no post-altar call buyer's remorse or deathbed claims of a sucker punch, bait and switch. Loving God and neighbor and self is the elemental stuff of Christian prayers, songs, T-shirts, and bumper stickers, and we know that. But as the master Morpheus said to protege Neo in the first and only truly great Matrix film, there is a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. Love is the path that Jesus laid out for us. The book, John Pavlovitz's If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk, Finding a Faith That Makes Us Better Humans. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Excuse me. And welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. David in Columbus, Ohio, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hello, Representative. I was anxious to know what you thought of the FDA appointment and what we can do to change this.
I'm not sure what the last part of the question was.
Well, they have a new appointment, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And what's the problem with it, David?
Well, apparently he's tied in tightly with pharmaceutical industries.
Okay, I don't know directly on his background, David. I do know that they've been on hold for a year since the Biden administration. It was just this week, I think 2 days ago, could it be? So I'm sorry, I'm not fully versed on his background, but that has caused all kinds of problems. I serve on the Appropriations Agriculture Subcommittee that has oversight over the FDA, and we often have a lot of issues. In fact, I was on the phone with someone in the FDA this week around some animal veterinary compounding issues, and I'm glad there's someone there. But often people in the FDA wind up coming from the industry because of so-called expertise. I think the real check for us is to make sure this isn't something that's just going to be a rubber stamp for pharmaceutical companies, which I haven't heard other signal. We haven't had a lot of warnings on this, and he's been out there for months before the Republicans finally came around to allowing him to be improved. But we do watch the FDA very closely on that regard because it is extremely important.
Jimmy in Texarkana, Arkansas, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Yes, good to talk to you, Congressman. The question I have is, I've received SSI, Social Security Disability, and they have a rule that only allows me to leave the country, or allows people who receive that to leave the country for 30 days at a time. Can you eliminate that? Because I'm married to a Brazilian wife, and I may like to live in Brazil and still receive it should be my right to receive it, not, you know what I mean? That's my question.
Yeah, I hear you, Jimmy. I haven't dealt with that before from a constituent, so I'm going to write myself a note and we're going to look into it. But I don't quite know what the rationale on that is, but you're right. If you've paid into Social Security and you're receiving the benefit of Social Security, I don't know why they would have a dictate for you that other people on Social Security don't have. So I'm going to take a look at it.
Gladys in New Orleans, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Congressman Pocan, thank you very much. My question is in reference to Social Security. And I just don't understand why Social Security recipients get a raise every year, and it's wiped away. We got a 5.9 this year, which would have been nice. Why is it that it's allowed to be swiped away for insurance purposes or whatever, with the cost of living and everything else that's going on? We do not get a break.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, Gladys, and I think this is, I kind of inferred this in another question with someone. The way we provide an increase for Social Security is to the Consumer Price Index. The problem is, for most seniors, they're not, what they spend money on, we know by all statistics on this, is not what the Consumer Price Index is based on. They actually spend about 25% of their income on things like medication and healthcare. So there's a CPI-E that recognizes where seniors actually spend their money and would give a more significant increase to address exactly what you're saying. I mean, otherwise, if you get an index increase at the exact level that the economy is going, then you're still at zero flat amount of money. And instead, this would actually recognize the cost that seniors have. This is changed in the bill that John Larson has that's got, I think, over 200 sponsors in the House of Representatives. And I actually think this is something that Democrats would be very wise to be moving and passing this year.
Lou in Pueblo, Colorado, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Okay, good morning. I just have a simple question. I'd like a straight answer without any, we don't need to, or it's going away. Why don't we simply have the President of the United States declare that there shall be a vaccine requirement to get on any transportation in America? That way, within a week, they'd all get vaccinated.
Yeah, I mean, you could do that. There's a lot of opposition to not do that from a number of fronts. I have seen something where early on, when they were looking at how to get people vaccinated, it was the number one thing that would get people vaccinated if there was a requirement, but that was still at like 40%. So I don't think every person, maybe in your social economics class, flies, but not every person this is an issue for, and it wouldn't necessarily get us 100%. So yes, it was the number one issue. It was about 41% of the people said they would likely get a vaccine. This is though very early when no one had vaccines yet, if that was a requirement. But there are a number of different reasons why people have not proposed this.
Lanny in Palm Springs, California. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Thank you very much. I'd like to talk a little bit about, I got a question about inflation. I'm just wondering, where all this money that is going. I understand that about 1% of the increased inflation has to do with higher wages. But, a lot of, we keep hearing these things about, supply chains and all this kind of stuff. So my question is, who is getting all this money that's being generated by this increase in inflation? Is it going to corporations, the billionaires? Where is all this money going if only 1% of it is going because of higher wages?
Yeah, Lenny, that's a great question. And a lot of it, honestly, is going overseas because we don't produce things in the United States anymore. So I serve on the Joint Economic Committee, which is one of 4 statutory committees in federal government that have both House and federal members. So I serve on a committee with Ted Cruz because he's also on that committee. And we have a lot of economists come before us. 30% of inflation right now is caused by auto vehicle prices. That's largely driven by the chip problem we have. That's why we passed the Competes Act to try to deal with that. We make something like, I think it's 12% of all the chips we use in the United States. Therefore, we're reliant on 88% coming from other countries. So when everything reopened and supply chains had stopped across the country and there was demand, increased demand and scarcity of products, Economics 101 means you're going to drive the cost of those goods up. So that money is largely going to these overseas producers of goods. So that's why it's so crazy. So one, we do have to produce more things in the United States, from agriculture to medicine to other production, especially on things that can drive inflation. But again, that's not Joe Biden's problem, right? And all the Republicans are trying to act like he did something wrong, when in reality, if COVID had been handled better in the beginning, we likely wouldn't have had the supply chain issues and then the economic, greed of many. Secondly, I just want to add this, Tom, I think we are being gouged by gas producers unfairly, because when gas went up was about a year ago, when there was the freezing conditions in Texas and they weren't ready in their energy grid, and production went down and the refineries had to close down and prices went up, and they never went back down. And I think they've artificially kept them up just to gouge consumers. And I think the president and the White House should be far more aggressive and go after them, find them, throw them in jail, whatever you got to do. But that is something that every consumer sees on a regular basis, and I don't think it's actually based on the same supply and demand issues that other increases in inflation have been.
Are you talking gasoline or natural gas?
I think it's a little bit of both, right, with the suppliers, because this was the excuse that happened, when that bad weather happened about, I think it was last March in Texas, and it's been artificially up there. And I think, again, this isn't following the same pattern of the normal inflation that we've seen because of supply chain, and I think there should be more aggressive behavior.
Yeah, I'm with you. Morris in Long Beach, California, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Good morning, gentlemen. I'll be in and out burger. Check this out. The Select Committee is going to be doing some primetime viewing when they put all these guys on TV. I was just wondering if the nonprofits can get a discount. Congressman Pocan can get a discount, or do I need to contact CNN and MSNBC? And also, public enemy number one, everybody knows this. Everybody knows this. Public enemy number one is Fox Illiterate News. They're demonic. They got a sick, twisted, and sadistic vernacular. What can be done about what these guys are spitting out? Because they're trying to tear this country up. And don't forget about the advertisement. Thank you.
You gave me a lot there. I don't know about advertising rates based on people watching the January 6th Commission, although, Morris, I'm glad you're going to be watching it, and I hope a lot of people will. And I hope people, if I can just take a quick aside, a little privilege, that don't forget it's not just the violent actions on the attempted insurrection that happened in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. It's the 7 states where they had false electors submit names to try to circumvent the election, to try to make Mike Pence break the law, essentially to say that he wasn't going to recognize some states. We now know that it was in months in coordination. So that, to me, just because it's shady legal work and forged documents, is really no different than the acts of insurrection that happened on January 6th. And let's make sure we're focusing on those just as strongly.
Yeah, very well said. That's the focus, actually, of my Hartmann Report newsletter today, too. You know, with an extensive quote from a senator who was there in 1876. I wrote that in March of 2020, and I said, Trump is going to try this. And sure enough, it looks like March of 2020 is when they decided to try it. I hope I didn't give them the idea. I don't know, but I laid it all out.
We'll blame someone else.
Yeah, let's hope so. 45 minutes past the hour.
Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Right back with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan. Stick around. And welcome back. Kevin in Candor, Arizona. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Yes, thank you, Tom and Representative Pocan. I just wanted to call and voice my extreme opposition to these Medicare direct entities, direct
contracting entities.
Yeah, and wanted to get the representative's take on that. What could be done? Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, that's a great and timely question. Last week, and I hope I'm forgetting a member, and I apologize on this, Pramila Jayapal, Jan Schakowsky, Katie Porter, and myself were on a call with that division head as well as people who work in that division about this issue, because we have a huge problem. They got rid of 2 of the 3 experiments to try to essentially what looks like privatizing Medicare, but they kept one, and we have huge concerns because we have heard they're very secretive about the information that there's going to be a big addition of folks in it. We have expressed all the reasons to them why it doesn't make sense. I explicitly said if they don't have answers for us soon, I will ask that in public setting in the Appropriations Committee, and if necessary, we will take appropriations action to stop them from doing this, because we do not think this is a smart way to go. They said they're going to make significant changes to it, and they're going to continue. Our advice was stop the program then. Propose your significant changes. Let's look at it, but don't keep this dog out there and just put a bunch of different, sets of clothing on the dog. I mean, that's kind of what they're trying to do. It looks like, but they also don't share the information very well. So fortunately, a lot of us are on top of this. I think 50 of us signed a letter, and Katie Porter and I early on were active on this issue. We're going to continue to make sure that we're heard and fighting this, and we do have some real potential too in committees like mine on appropriations.
Yeah, this is becoming a very, very hot issue. Bina in Boulder, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Congressman Pocan. My wish is that all the talking would stop and we get some action. We only have a few short months before the midterms. We could lose it all. We need to have some executive action to protect voting rights. We need to cancel student debt. We need to do some of the things that the people want, that the Republicans are preventing, and we need to do it in a bold and in-your-face manner. We need you. The Democrats need to step up. We've waited a year, and we're at the end. We're at the end. They need to do something. We've lost the vaccination. We've lost the inflation conversation. We need to do something now.
Thank you, Vina.
Yeah, Vina, I'll tell you, I feel like you're sitting in our Congressional Progressive Caucus meetings, because we recently sat down as an executive board for the caucus, and we have a long list that we're going through right now, and we're probably within maybe weeks, but probably days, there's going to be an announcement of a bunch of ones that we're recommending the president do in advance of the State of the Union that we would like to see them take action on. A lot of them were what was in Build Back Better. A lot of them are other issues that have come up. But since the Republicans are completely unwilling to work with us and the Senate has this incredibly arcane rules around the filibuster, the only recourse we have left is executive actions, and we're absolutely advocating for them.
Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. We'll be right back with more of Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Actually, we'll be back in 60 seconds. Over on the commercial side of the show, I have to read a live ad for CB Distillery. We'll be right back right after that. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So you remember the administration originally said that we're going to give 4 free COVID tests to every household in America, and you can do that, get them delivered by the post office for free by going to covidtests.gov, covidtests.gov. But they said that they're not going to provide free test kits to people on Medicare. Instead, you have to go to covidtest.gov and get your 4 free test kits. Well, they have rethought this. This is a brand new policy. And this will be the first time that Medicare covers free over-the-counter tests of any kind for people who are, or offers free over-the-counter tests for anybody who's on Medicare. The pharmacy, Medicare pays the pharmacy direct, and you pick it up from your pharmacy. So just an FYI on that. And there are a few other dimensions that have to do with TRICARE and a few other things. We've got a video about it that's over at thomhartmann.com that you can check out. And welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Carlos in Miami, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Yes, Congressman. Yes, I wonder if we could. Right now we're in a tax season, and I know the government always says we have to protect ourselves against identity theft. Can you explain to me why the Social Security sends out the benefit statements and it lists your full Social Security number up at the top? And any bank statement you get from anybody, usually from your doctor, usually just has your last 4 digits. Do you know why? A couple of years, I've complained to my local congressman. She transferred me to the Social Security Department, and they told me, well, that has to be decided by higher ups. But I've never received anything. Do you know why the government does this?
Yeah, Carlos, no, I don't. In fact, I'm going to look when my form comes to see that, because I don't remember that. That does seem odd, especially on a mailed form. I've always had a problem when people want my last 4 of my Social Security as identifier for the very reason you're expressing. So often I try to find an alternative number. But I'll look at the form and Emily look in it.
Richard in Milwaukee, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, good morning. My question is, will we ever be able to do away with the Electoral College and simply elect our president with the popular vote, just like every other elected office in the country?
It's going to take a lot, Richard, honestly. I'm with you. I mean, I think the Electoral College is an antiquated system. Again, as we move forward as a country, there's things that we just simply change. And the fact that, you have, over 10% of Congress from California, and yet they have 2 senators, 2%. When you start looking at where populations are and where those Electoral College votes are based on that population, there's a lot of reasons why it would make some sense to have a reform in that process. And people often say, well, if you do that, people will only visit certain areas. And I don't think that's true. I think you could have a real reform around that and not worry about it. I just don't see it happening in the very immediate future, Richard, because it's a big idea. And look how hard we have even doing little ideas when you have a 50-50 Senate and a handful of a majority in the House. But I absolutely think it's worthy of people having this debate.
Mike in Whiting, Maine, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Well, thank you for taking me. Wish you both well. My question is, Representative, we all know that money in politics is the biggest problem that we have. Why can't we pass a law that after the representative is retiring, that they can't take home the campaign donations as a big retirement fund, that the money that's associated with that office when that individual retires, make it go back to the state to public education funding, because the money belongs to the office, not the representative. You know, if my representative, Susan Collins, was picking potatoes up in Aroostook County where she's from, the Koch brothers wouldn't be investing $30 million into advertisement for her. So, I mean, this has got to stop. If we don't take the money out of politics, the corruption is always going to be there. Thank you.
Yeah, well. Mike, I completely agree with you. I've always supported 100% public financing of campaigns because money distorts absolutely. I've seen it at every level of government I've been in, and certainly at the federal level more than anything. The only thing that I think you are wrong on is we don't keep our campaign funds if we don't spend it. We can't, in fact, use it personally. You can give it to a nonprofit. You can give it back to the federal government, I suppose, just like a nonprofit. But you don't get the money. So I just want to put that out there.
But you can do that with certain types of super PACs, it appears.
Yeah, I don't know that. I just know the actual campaign funds that any elected official has at the federal level. Right. You can't. Speaking of that, Tom, though, sometime we should talk about these scam members of Congress and Senate are putting together these super PACs and raising a bunch of money from people and then shutting them down and distributing it just among the people who formed it. And it's a way to get those same really wealthy, often Wall Street donors to give to them multiple times. And we're actually looking at doing something to kill that process. But I'd love to have that conversation sometime because it's an emerging stealth issue that some of my colleagues are going to be very pissed at me, and I don't care.
Okay. Stan in Northridge, California. We're down to a minute and a half here. Stan, you're on the air with Representative Pocan. Quick question, please.
Yeah, on the gas gouging, I first of all, thanks for taking my call, but I think we should boycott the gas. I mean, at least once or twice a week. What do you think of that, Congressman?
Yeah, buy electric cars.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's hard, right? Right now, I mean, we have a Volt, so we kind of lucky at home because we're plugging in and using that predominantly. But because I live in Wisconsin with snow, I also have a Jeep Wrangler. Those are our two cars. And, you know, in winter, I kind of got to have gas if I'm going to get home and get through the snow. So I understand what you're saying. I just don't know if that works. I think the real thing is you have the Department of Justice kind of be a little more aggressive in asking some questions and either scare them into doing the right thing or prosecute them into doing the right thing.
Congressman, we're down to 30 seconds. What should we all be looking for during these next 2 weeks, the Congress, or this week and next week, the Congress are out of session?
I think the biggest thing is, we're coming up to the State of the Union on March 1st, right? Not that far off. What's the president going to propose? I'm guessing there may be a pivot from Build Back Better, just my guess, because we're not seeing the activity in the Senate. But what are we going to do next? Is it these executive orders? How are we going to get voting rights taken care of? People are ready for more to happen, but we've got to get out of this hangover of COVID and dealing with inflation. And I think you're going to see the president and the administration address those very directly.
From your lips to God's ears. Congressman Mark Pocan, thanks so much for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, as always.
My pleasure. Middays with Mark, Congressman Pocan's website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. We will be back with Reverend Barber on the other side of this break. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at dinovite.com. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by John Pavlovitz. It's titled, If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk, Finding a Faith That Makes Us Better Humans. This is from the introduction titled, You Had One Job. If you want a good laugh, Google the phrase, you had one job. The results are hilariously tragic parade of seemingly impossible fails, unfathomably poor planning, and face-palming inducing human error. A piece of melted cheese on top of a fast food burger bun. The word stop misspelled on a street crossing. A keep to the right sign with its arrow facing left. A toilet lid inexplicably installed below the seat itself. It's strange stuff. Seeing these stupefying train wrecks and task execution tends to elicit two responses, usually making you feel a little bit better about yourself while simultaneously wanting to track down the culprits in an effort to understand how they managed to neglect the primary duty assigned to them. We begin to speculate. Were they temporarily distracted? Did they not properly comprehend the instructions? Did they feel as though someone above them in the chain of command dropped the ball? Were they just plain lazy? When people miss the point so spectacularly, we want to know how and why, because that kind of failure feels impossible from the outside. It seems unfathomable to get the main thing wrong, and seeing it happen sparks our curiosity. I imagine Jesus knows well the curiosity that comes with watching people give clear direction lose their way. As a longtime Christian by aspiration, if not always in practice, I often envision an exasperated Jesus coming back and the first words out of his mouth to his followers as his feet hit the pavement being, "You had one job, love. So what happened?" I wonder what massive wave of excuses and rationalizations would come flooding from the mouths of the faithful multitude in front of him, how they might justify their mistreatment of the assailed humanity in their care, the verbal and theological gymnastics they'd attempt to avoid culpability for their own cruelty. Would they stridently recite him a verse from Leviticus? Would they blame the liberal media for morally corrupting America? Would they talk about people's wicked lifestyle choices? Would they argue that they were loving the sinners in their midst, but simply hating their sin? Would they frantically offer up the same platitudes and parrot back the same partisan talking points that they've gotten used to brandishing on social media and proffering in Sunday school classes? And if all else failed to convince him, would they quote Jesus to himself in a desperate Hail Mary effort to pass the buck to him for what they did or failed to do while supposedly standing up for him? And there, fully seen in the piercing gaze of the namesake of their very faith tradition, with all their justifications and excuses exhausted and only their fully exposed hearts left, would any of their responses be sufficient reasons for refusing to love? When that was the singular task and primary commandment that he left them responsible for tending to? In my less compassionate moments, I admit that I like to picture it not going well for them. I know it's far less than admirable, let alone Christ-like. But some days my heart strangely warms at the possibility of a few billion brimstone-breathing evangelists, sanctimonious conservative politicians, and plank-eyed judgmental Christian neighbors all having to explain themselves in a sanctified flop-swept moment they can't exegete or gaslight themselves out of, and they all get what they have coming to them. But my self-righteous revelry doesn't last long. The mirror calls me out as I remember what I think I know about Jesus, and that rescues me from full-blown, unabated hubris. I begin to wonder what my excuses might be, how I'd spin the enmity I manufacture here, what story I'd come up with for not doing the one task we both know compromises a disciple's job description. And if I really believe what I'm supposed to believe, are any of my justifications sufficient? If God is love, and if Jesus is the perfect expression of that love, and if I'm supposedly trying to follow that Jesus, how could I be so love impaired so frequently? How do I miss the singular point so consistently? It's not as if I didn't know what I was signing up for, like some lengthy online user agreement I blindly accept in haste, missing the bombshell fine print underneath. Having read the Gospels a few million times, give or take a few 100,000, I know the primary commandment is not something I need to excavate from cumbersome layers of foreign language translations and cultural mores of the time. Jesus himself clearly laid out the most important commandment for me and for everyone who's ever cracked open a Bible, and even most people who've never cracked open a Bible. And so we'd all understand what's being asked of us going in, so there would be no post-altar call buyer's remorse or deathbed claims of a sucker punch, bait and switch. Loving God and neighbor and self is the elemental stuff of Christian prayers, songs, T-shirts, and bumper stickers, and we know that. But as the master Morpheus said to protege Neo in the first and only truly great Matrix film, there is a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. Love is the path that Jesus laid out for us. The book, John Pavlovitz's If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk, Finding a Faith That Makes Us Better Humans.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us is our old friend Bishop William J. Barber II. He's the pastor of Greenleaf Christian Church, Disciples of Christ in Goldsboro, North Carolina. He's the president and senior lecturer at Repairers of the Breach, and he's the architect of the Forward Together Moral Movement. The website, breachrepairers.org. You can tweet him at REVDR Barber or at B Repairers. Dr. Barber, welcome back to the program, and thanks so much for joining us. First of all, did I get the website correct in my introduction here?
Yes, it's www.breachrepairers.org, or now, you know, with me being co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, people can also go to www.poorpeoplescampaign.org. And Tom, it's good to be back on your show.
Well, thank you. It's always nice talking with you. You've got this mobilization tour that, if I have my details right, kicked off just a couple days ago on Valentine's Day, and is going to culminate in D.C. on June 18th. Do I have that right? And give us the details.
You got it right. We kicked it off on Love Day, on Valentine's Day, in Alabama, Georgia, and Florida, and Mississippi. You know, 1/3 of all poor people live in the South, poor low-wealth people. 1/3 of all poor low-wealth white people live in the South. And we have in this country 140 million poor and low-wealth people before COVID. Now, think about that. 50% of the nation's children, 41 million people are living with dollar minimum wage. For 2015 plus tips. Of the day for a moral reset in this country. And for a third construction, the mass poor people, low-wage workers assembly, moral march on Washington and to the polls, June 18th in Washington, D.C., for this moral reset, to give the stage to poor people from Appalachia to Alabama, from California to the Carolinas, along with religious leaders and economists and lawyers who going to say, we're tired of the lies of scarcity. We're tired of the lies that we don't know how to do this. We can end poverty from the bottom up if we would engage the third Reconstruction agenda.
Can you speak to the first two reconstructions and why a third reconstruction is necessary and what it's made of, what the details?
Black and all over the South, white slaves and free to open up voting. They changed labor laws. They changed criminal justice laws. They changed the Constitution, put into the fourth protection under the 15th Amendment. Nobody can deny or abridge the right to vote. Now, that Reconstruction was put down was pushback. There was a group of people that said it was time to take back America again. They cheated in an election in 1877 and put a president in place who lost the popular vote but was given the Electoral College and then began to turn back at the Supreme Court. So it ended with riots and literally insurrections all over the country. Then the second Reconstruction is 1954 to 1968, beginning with the Brown versus Board of Education decision. During that time, we got Medicaid, Medicare. We got the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65. Fundamental policy shifts to try to address poverty. You got the War on Poverty to address racism. Then it was killed and assassinated. The King was murdered, and so many others. The president was murdered. And then you get the Southern strategy, Richard Nixon, Pat Buchanan telling Richard Nixon, we have to engage in positive polarization at all times to keep poor black and white people away from each other, particularly voting in the South. A third Reconstruction really will be about finishing what didn't finish in the first two. It will be expanding and protecting voting rights. It would be guaranteeing income for those that are disabled, those that are hurting in our society. It would be guaranteeing a living wage as a minimum wage. It would be guaranteeing basic, decent housing. It would be addressing the mass incarceration and the criminalization of black and brown and poor white communities. It would be addressing what we call systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, the denial of health care, the war economy, where we spend now 54 cents of every discretionary dollar on the war economy and less than 16 cents, Tom, on things that would really lift people up and would be a war on poverty rather than a war on the poor. And a third Reconstruction would also address the false, distorted moral narrative of religious nationalism. We actually have a third Reconstruction platform. You can find it at www.poorpeoplescampaign.org. And lastly, the economists have said that a moral agenda is an economically sound agenda, and that to not engage this is not only morally indefensible, constitutionally inconsistent, politically insensitive, but it's economically insane. It's economically insane to have 87 million people right now either uninsured or underinsured. It's economically insane not to pay essential workers a living wage and make sure we have child income tax credit and earned income tax credit and those things that would actually lift the society and would actually grow the society.
I'd like you to help me with a reality check on my perception of what's been going on here. My recollection, and I was actually quite politically active in the 60s, was that Martin Luther King was as much reaching out to white people as he was also speaking about the horrors of segregation and you know, the whole crisis of black people in the United States at the time. In fact, when he was assassinated, he was trying to organize sanitation workers, many of whom were white. He spoke about this frequently, in addition to speaking loudly against the Vietnam War and U.S. imperialism and other problems. But there's been this kind of Disneyfication of Dr. King, and I see, frankly, I think in some of the anti-critical race theory nonsense that's coming out of the Republican Party, also an attempt to only show that Disneyfied part. So he was actually pushing poor people's issues. You know, yes, race was a piece of this, obviously, but not, you know, at the forefront, at least in the context of the Poor People's March, was like, let's deal with poverty, period. And my understanding is that that's what you're doing too. And yet, our media constantly covers you and the work you're doing and the Poor People's Campaign and what Martin Luther King did as if it was purely an issue around black people. It seems like if it was put together, and you have, if it was accurately reported, and this is my reality check, maybe I've got this wrong, if it was accurately reported, you'd be bringing along a lot of white people too.
And we are, in spite of the things that people have done. We had planned to have this mass assembly in 2020. COVID hit. We went online. 2.7 million people showed up. You know, we're as welcome in Eastern Kentucky as we are in the Delta of Mississippi. But here's the reality check. And Dr. King talked about the triune evil. They're not just in '67. He was talking about it in the first sermon. One of the first sermons he preached at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church when he talked about Paul's letter to the American Christian. He talked about how the 1% was ruling over the 99%. But at the period you're speaking of, he said, listen, you got to deal with racism, war, and militarism. We say today you have to deal with systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, denial of health care, the war economy, and the false moral-natural religious nationalism. Now, on one side, even liberals try to reduce Dr. King down to one issue. I've challenged some quote-unquote African-Americans who do that, say for instance, voting rights. We said it was Jim Crow. This attack on voting rights today is not Jim Crow. It's James Crow Esquire. The reason it's not just Jim Crow is because if you look at the bills that are being passed, yes, it's going to hurt black people, but it's also going to hurt white people, disabled people, Native Americans, Asians. In fact, I think 55 million people, if the current bills that are out there were passed in every state, would lose the access to the polls they had in 2020. 55 million people, not 55 million black people. Secondly, Dr. King would never have separated voting rights from economic justice. So, for instance, when Joe Manchin voted to block living wages in the American Rescue Plan, civil rights leaders, labor leaders, everybody should have been calling that what it was, a race vote and a class vote. Why race? Because one vote blocked 41% of African Americans from lifting out of poverty and low wealth, but it also blocked 31 million Americans from being lifted out of poverty, the majority of which are white, because in this country, of the 140 million poor and low wealth people, 66 million are white, 26 million are black. What we need is a unification. In 1965, the end of the Selma to Montgomery March, Dr. King said that what caused the segregated society and the voter suppression was not just a hatred of people's skin color. It was the fear of the aristocracy, the bourbon class, he called it, of the masses of Negro people and the masses of poor white people coming together, forming a political bloc that would fundamentally shift the economic architecture of the nation. And it started in the first Reconstruction, because the fear in the South was always that coalition, in fact, the fear in the country. And so what we're saying, Tom, you're exactly right, is that there's time for a moral fusion movement, an interrelational movement that addresses these interlocking injustices. You can't separate them out. So if you're white and you're concerned about economics, you have to be concerned about racist voter suppression. If you're concerned about racist voter suppression, you need to understand how it connects to the denial of other progressive policies. And I actually get bothered quite a bit. My co-chair is white. I happen to be African-American. Our movement is about all five of these things we lift. And sometimes, Tom, in the media, they'll say, well, which one is the most important? And I say, all of them, because all of them interrelate. And they'll say, well, you're a civil rights leader. I said, we're moral leaders. We're religious and moral leaders, human rights leaders who are trying to say that the people who make up that 140 million poor and low wealth in this country, it's time for them to come together. Because right now in this country, Tom, last point, we did a study, 15 states, 15 so-called battleground states. If anywhere between 1% and 25% of poor and low wealth people would vote around an agenda, not black people, but poor, low wealth, they could fundamentally decide who sits in the presidency.
There you go. There you go. Dr. Barber, we're out of time, but you're absolutely right. It's brilliant. Thank you so much for dropping by today, Reverend William Barber.
Join us on June 18th.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. And bless you, too. breachrepairers.org and poorpeoplescampaign.org. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Gabriella in Los Angeles. Hey, Gabriella, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thank you for letting me talk today. I've been catching up while I was waiting regarding electronic vehicles and the manufacturers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's saying right now they're actually losing money, like up to $12,000 or more per vehicle, and they're absorbing the cost. What I had heard from various news sources is that a lot of the manufacturers of current electronic, but especially the ones coming up, they're going to start charging a monthly fee in order to be connected with all the electronics in your car, like as an ongoing, almost like, utility.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, Gabriella, that has been wildly exaggerated. Right now, with any car, whether it's electric or gas, and apparently one of the reasons they're exaggerating it is as trying to trash electric cars. This is not something that has to do with electric cars. It has to do with all cars. If you have, a GM gas vehicle, you've got low jack built into it. You can turn it on, but you have to pay a monthly fee for it. So if you have an emergency, you can just push a button and it'll call the police for you. I believe that you have to pay a monthly fee for that. If you want to have, a satellite receiver on your car, you have to pay a fee for it. I have a Toyota. It's a plug-in hybrid, but it's a gas vehicle. I pay a monthly fee to them so that and it's relatively small. Actually, I think it's an annual fee, so that I have access to updated maps, updated software, and that emergency towing service that they offer. They're looking for ways to get subscription income. All the car manufacturers are doing this. But no, it has nothing to do with whether the car is electric or not, and they're not going to turn off your heat if you don't pay.
See, I'd heard it was going to involve basic things like, your car electronically moving back and forth, heating up your car.
Yeah, I've seen that on the internet, Gabriella. It's not true.
It isn't?
No,
okay, good.
And the car companies are really trying to say, no, this was one of these right-wing websites that went off on this thing, and it has now become the latest urban myth that's traveling around the internet. So
thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot for the call.
Okay, bye.
You're welcome. Patricia in Pueblo, Colorado. Hey, Patricia, what's up?
Yes, I'd like to call your attention. Nobody seems to know that all nations turn their sovereignty over to the World Trade Organization, and they dictate that you can't have any leeway to bankroll substantial social safety net things. They can't help out, if they choose to help local industries, they're denied that. So all of these things...
Well, hang on just a second, Patricia. The WTO does not dictate social policy. There are programs to prevent dumping, where countries just decide that they're going to lose a massive amount of money to wipe out industries in other countries, which seems reasonable.
They can't choose to bankroll a substantial social safety net.
No, that's to the best of my knowledge, Patricia, that's not true. Every other developed democracy in the world that might be, and I'm not a fan of the WTO. I don't think it ever should have been created, and I'd like to see it just disintegrate tomorrow morning. But that said, they're not saying no, you can't have Social Security. Every other country in the world has a far more robust social safety net than we have. We'll be right back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. We have not in the United States historically protected people's feelings by law. We protect, people from being victims of actions. You can't be discriminated against in a store or a restaurant or a mortgage or anything else based on your race or your gender or your ethnicity or in many cases, your sexual identity or gender identity. But it is not typically, typically we don't put into law, you may not hurt somebody's feelings. But that's exactly what Florida is doing with their so-called woke act, the Stop the Wrongs to Our Kids and Employees Act, which basically threatens teachers if they cause their white children or any children to, quote, feel discomfort, guilt, or anguish as a result of what's being taught. This is a dangerous precedent. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out. And welcome back. So this would normally be my opening rant, but it's the second hour, and we had a couple of guests. But the post that I wrote yesterday afternoon that we and did the final edit on this morning at 5 o'clock in the morning is posted over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, America Needs to Listen to Canada About an Elections Agency. By the way, buried in this article is the whole story of the election of 1876 that Donald Trump used as a template to try to steal the election of 2020. And, that in and of itself is probably worth, a completely separate article. But I built it into this. But the point that I'm making with this article is that we are, to the best of my knowledge, the only fully developed democracy in the world that doesn't have national standards for elections. Canada, for example, has an agency. It's a government agency, but it is nonpartisan. It's not political. It's not subject to the whims of politics. It's just a professional agency that does its job, like the DMV, right? Like, we're going to make sure that the stop signs are up. We're going to make sure that the street lights are working. This is what they do with elections. It's called Elections Canada. And we need something like that here in the United States. You've got states, now in Texas, 40% of the mail-in ballots applications are being rejected. This is nuts. We've got states that make it super hard to vote, and then you got states like Oregon where you're automatically registered to vote when you get your driver's license, and you get your ballot in the mail a few weeks before the election. You have plenty of time to look up the obscure judicial candidates and ballot initiatives on the internet and decide how you're going to vote, and you just drop it in the mail. There are 5 states now that are all mail voting, including Utah, which is a Republican-controlled state. It works really well. Now, I'm not saying we should have all mail voting nationwide, but it should absolutely be an option for people. They've basically banned it in Texas for anybody who's under 65. Of course, they want to leave the over 65 voting by mail because, they tend to vote for Republicans. But this is just crazy. We need national standards for elections. We need a national election commission here in the United States. And frankly, I think that we're going to see in this election in November, just a few months down the road, in fact, we're probably going to see the beginnings of it in the primaries, lots and lots of people in these states, Republican-controlled states, where they've really cracked down on voting and they're really trying to make it hard for citizens of the United States to vote. We're going to see a backlash to that. You're going to see a lot of really pissed off people after November, in my opinion. If things keep going the way that they're going right now, and if the media stays on this, and that's a huge if, then there's going to be a lot of political will after the election for doing something like this. And I just wanted to lay down this marker right now and say, let's plan on it. Elections USA, a national agency that will oversee our elections.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
In country after country, and Republicans are showing us that we can't trust something as vital to democracy as our elections for these partisan hacks. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Case Against George W. Bush by Stephen C. Markoff, with a foreword by Richard Clark. This is from the foreword. For some Americans, George W. Bush looks good by comparison to the incumbent, Donald Trump. In his post-presidency, Bush has devoted himself to worthy causes and acted in a bipartisan manner. The 43rd president should, however, be judged not by comparison to America's worst president, nor by what Bush may have done after leaving office. He should be evaluated for his actions in office, his nonfeasance, misfeasance, and malfeasance. This volume from Stephen Markoff provides the evidence for such an evaluation. You can judge for yourself. For me, there is little doubt. I, unfortunately, witnessed Bush and his administration make many of their most cataclysmic decisions. I was in the room when some of them occurred. When in December 2000, the Supreme Court of the United States decided on a 5-4 vote that George W. Bush would become the 43rd president, I was the Special Assistant to the President for National Security and National Coordinator for Security and Counterterrorism for President William J. Clinton. I anticipated leaving the White House on January 20th, 2001, when the Clinton presidency ended. However, I was asked by the incoming administration to stay on for an unspecified period because, as it was explained to me, there was no one on Bush's incoming team who knew much about terrorism or who wanted my job. Departing Clinton administration officials stressed to the newly arriving Bush team and to Bush himself the importance and urgency of dealing with the al-Qaeda terrorist threat. Indeed, the Clinton administration had developed an extensive series of further steps to combat al-Qaeda that it would have taken had it continued in office, or indeed had Vice President Al Gore assumed office in 2001. Within days of Bush's inauguration, I asked for an urgent meeting at the cabinet level to review both the threat and the plan to ratchet up the measures against al-Qaeda. No such meeting occurred until a week before 9/11, and that meeting was inconclusive. From January 2001 through the second week in September, Bush personally received frequent intelligence warnings that al-Qaeda posed an imminent threat. He convened no meetings to address the issue. His inner circle of national security advisors did nothing, despite frequent urgings by the CIA director and the national coordinator, including such vivid imagery as our asking in writing that they consider a near future in which there would be hundreds of dead bodies in the streets of America. Instead, they focused on Iraq and the regime of Saddam Hussein. Bush's nonfeasance cost American lives. Following the deaths of over 3,000 innocent civilians on 9/11, the Bush administration attempted to tie the al-Qaeda attack to Iraq, which had nothing to do with it. Despite CIA and FBI analyses that reiterated Iraq's non-involvement, the Bush administration almost immediately followed the 9/11 attack by beginning to make plans to invade Iraq. Senior Bush officials spoke privately of the need to demonstrate our strength in the wake of the 9/11 attack, show our might by destroying the largest army in the Middle East, and thereby also prove our willingness to take U.S. military casualties to achieve our ends. Prior to 9/11, foreign terrorists who had attacked Americans had been successfully sought out throughout the world and arrested by U.S. law enforcement authorities, assisted by the intelligence community. Many terrorists had been returned to U.S. territory, given their Miranda rights, provided with counsel, tried in our civilian criminal courts, convicted, sentenced, and incarcerated in maximum security prison cells. One, tried by the Commonwealth of Virginia, was executed. Despite this record, the Bush administration abandoned criminal process and established its own extrajudicial system for dealing with terrorists post 9/11. That new system used techniques that any objective observer would judge were torture. Perhaps the most well-known torture technique was the procedure known as waterboarding. The United States government had tried World War II Japanese military personnel for using the exact same technique. They were found guilty, and some were executed by hanging. The United States Senate's Committee on Intelligence conducted the most extensive oversight and investigation and examination in its history on the issue of torture during the Bush administration. That voluminous study concluded that torture was employed and that it had not, despite administration claims to the contrary, uniquely revealed information that had prevented terrorist attacks. To the contrary, it showed that tortured prisoners, unable to satisfy their interrogators with information that the terrorists did not know, instead guessed at what kind of story would stop the torture and then fabricated information of the kind they thought their prosecutors wanted to hear. Bush was not only aware of the torture, he approved it. His role in giving authorization for such acts can rightly be considered criminal malfeasance, as should his orders to invade Iraq. Among the many justifications the Bush administration considered for their invasion and occupation of Iraq, they chose finally to make the alleged weapons of mass destruction existence their chief complaint. The book, The Case Against George W. Bush by Stephen C. Markoff. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. So if you want to know what the Republicans are for, you'll recall, President Biden recently in his one-year anniversary of becoming president speech said that, who would have imagined that all they were in favor of doing was just obstructing anything I'm doing. And then he went on to say, what are the Republicans for? What does Mitch McConnell stand for? Chris Sununu, the governor of New Hampshire, actually went and talked to the number of Republican senators when he was thinking about running for the Senate, asked them, what are you guys doing? And they said, we're just here basically obstructing Biden. That's all we're doing. And Sununu said, screw that. I'm not going to run for the Senate then. He said they were all, for the most part, content with the speed at which they weren't doing anything. It bothered me that they were okay with that. So then, Mitch McConnell got asked by an NBC, Leanne Caldwell at NBC, what are you guys going to do if you get elected? And McConnell said, I'll tell you after the election. This is nuts. We got a video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just a couple of newsy things I wanted to put on your radar screen, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. First off, this is hysterical. This happened today. This just happened a couple of hours ago. Donald Trump, they are the state Supreme Court. Let me start over again. The state attorney general, Letitia James, in New York State, is trying to subpoena Donald Trump and his family to come in and testify about the apparent crimes that they've committed, about inflating the value of their properties when they're trying to get loans, about deflating the value of their properties when they're asked how much they owe for taxes. They're saying, no, we don't want to come, we don't want to testify. And Trump's lawyer went into court this morning, and this is absolutely hysterical. Alina Habba is the name of the lawyer. And I'm assuming it's she, was arguing in front of Judge Arthur Engoron and said that, I'll just read you the text. This is just hysterical. The Trump attorney said, speaking of Letitia James, the Attorney General, she has such disdain for this person because he is president, because he is Donald Trump, and he could probably win again in 24. He has First Amendment rights. He's allowed to be a Republican. So the judge was like, what are you talking about, basically, The judge says, there's no viewpoint discrimination. I'm just saying there's none. In other words, we're not discriminating against Donald Trump by trying to force him to testify about whether or not he engaged in criminal activity because he's a Republican. Are you kidding me? That's the essence of what the judge said. And so then the lawyer says, but he's a member of a protected class. Aha, says the judge. What protected class is he a member of? And this is when Trump's lawyer says, his political speech. If he was not sitting as a Republican and was not a former president who might run again, this would not be happening. So she is discriminating. Letitia James, the Attorney General, is discriminating against him for that. And the judge's clerk actually jumps in at this point and says, excuse me, protected class means race, religion, or sex discrimination. It doesn't mean Republicans or former presidents. And the judge agreed. The judge said, and I quote, the traditional protected classes are race, religion, etc. Donald Trump doesn't fit that model. He's not being discriminated against based on race, is he? Or on religion? He's not a protected class. And then he goes on to say, if Ms. James has a thing against him, okay, but that's not unlawful discrimination. He's just a bad guy she should go after as the chief law enforcement officer of the state. Isn't that hysterical? The judge saying about Trump, he's just a bad guy. I love it. I absolutely love it. So, how long is this going to go on? I don't know. We'll see. It's shall we say, a bizarre time in the history of the United States. Also, yesterday, when Jen Psaki that Fox News was carrying the White House press conference live, and one of the right-wingers got up and said, well, what about funding government crack pipes? And Jen Psaki immediately started pointing out that there is no government funding of crack pipes, and it's a thing that was made up on the right wing, and they're going all hysterical about it in Fox News. And as she started that little riff, Fox News cut away from the press conference. You know, they literally don't want their viewers to know what's actually going on in America. Okay, all that said, let's pick up your phone calls. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Norma, what's on your mind today?
Well, you just added to it. But I was listening to Bishop Barber, and he is saying exactly what I have been trying to do here in Montgomery. I go out and I try to talk to people and tell them it doesn't cost you a thing to be kind, polite, or considerate of other human beings, that we need to start working on getting ourselves back together as the people, the citizens of the United States of America. There is no reason for us to be disrespectful or even hate somebody because they're different from you, no matter what the reason, short, fat, tall, skinny, whatever. And this is something I've been trying to teach people, is that the only enemy we really have is the corporations. We are not each other's enemies. We need to be friends and coworkers and neighbors and family members working together to make a better country and be better people. But if we continue to listen to things like Fox, we are being driven apart. And we have to get together and start working to get a Congress that works for us, because our enemy is the corporation that owns Congress. Yeah. And we are not the property of the corporations. We were all born free, and they do not have any rights to us. They do not have any rights to our income. You don't have to pay what they want. You have to pay for services, yes. But I consistently tell them that, no, I cannot afford that. And I don't think anybody else does. Our country is too compliant when it comes to what, like your phone company wants. You tell them, no, I can't afford that. I will do without, and see what happens across the country. This works, people. Believe me, it works. Yeah. But we cannot continue like this. If we don't win in November, we're done. We have to get people who will stand up and fight against corporate greed so that we can have the things we need. We have, 8 senators who said, no, we cannot have expanded Medicare? Do you remember the fight over the firefighters' health bill? They didn't want to continue it because it would cost money. Well, we have a right to the money that we pay in taxes to come back to us in the things that we need, like child care and long-term care. And when these corporations say, no, we're not even going to raise minimum wage because you're not worth it, that's ridiculous. A friend of mine is pushing out, raise the minimum wage to $17.76 because he's a patriot.
I love it, $17.76 minimum wage. That's a good number.
Yeah, but, hey, people, wake up. Yeah. Talk to people. I talk to strangers every day, Tom, and I have been going through the dismantling of my kitchen. It wasn't just the dishwasher, it was the stove and the refrigerator and the microwave and the electricians and the plumbers. And as these people come in, I have talked to each and every last one of them because they're there and they can't walk off.
Right. And you're an evangelist. I love it.
But if you don't start talking to strangers, if we each of us, what does it take to open your mouth? You have freedom of speech. All they can do is walk away.
Yeah. And God willing, in a couple of months, we'll be able to, even say hi to the person sitting at the table next to you in the restaurant. I mean, it's...
I do that anyway. There's no law
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do, yeah.
I'm poor. I'm a poor person. I'm not powerful. I'm not rich, but I have a mouth, and I use it because it's the only tool I have. Yeah. And as Barber said, if we don't start working together, getting white people together. Tom, my neighborhood is full of black people. I have doctors and professors and lawyers and cops and deputy sheriffs who live here in the neighborhood, which was traditionally white. But it's one of the safest places to live because it's on a hill. They reclaimed land from floodway to floodplain, and they're building on it. And those people don't even understand that their whole house could be underwater if we lose one dam. We're downstream from 10.
Yikes.
Yeah, we're downstream from 10 locks and dams. But, you have to think about how does your neighborhood work? Can you talk to your neighbors? Do you know who lives in that house?
Yeah.
I know my neighbors, Tom, because I make an effort, and I think it shocks people. But if we don't reach out to each other as fellow citizens, as free-born American citizens, we're in trouble because we can't get our messages across that we do not belong to the corporations, and the corporations do not have the right to rule Congress and rule us. Right. And that is our problem, the money of the corporations.
Yeah, I get it. No, and I agree with you. You finish your thought, and I got to move along.
Yeah, I want ranked choice voting, too.
Yeah, okay, I'm with you. Yes, let's create a list. Norma, thank you so much. Diane in Flemington, New Jersey. Hey, Diane, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thank you for having me. I have a comment in response to something you said a break or two ago.
Mm-hmm.
You know, isn't there a saying that says what's good for the goose is good for the gander, right?
Yeah, it's an old cliche.
This is in reference to that's going on with the laws about how in school you can't upset the kids with what you're teaching or whatever. Well, what if this got turned around? That the black people were upset because of what's not being taught. I mean, couldn't this be turned around?
I think it will be, Diane. I mean, most of these laws are not in force right now. They're moving their way through legislatures, and particularly some of the bizarre ones that have, the ability to sue schools or even sue teachers, that are taking off using the logic of the Texas anti-abortion law. My guess is that once even one of those laws becomes actual law, you're going to see folks on the left or to the point that you made, African Americans coming out and saying, wait a minute, you're not teaching American history. And the history of black people in this country is also the history of America. You're not teaching American history. We feel that, we have been harmed by what you're doing now, and so we're going to be suing. And
there would be a totally different response to a Board of Education meeting filled with African American people instead of white people.
Absolutely. Or white people who are just pissed off that their own children are not learning the real history of the United States, including the god-awful racial part, of the real history of the United States. What this reminds me of, Diane, is back when what was it, Alabama or Mississippi? I'm pretty sure it's Alabama that Judge Roy Moore was, on the Supreme Court, and they tried to pass this law that he could put his 10 Commandments on state property, even though the First Amendment says that there shall be basically no connection between church and state. And they were all gung-ho for it, and you had like a dozen different Christian organizations that had gone out and put up crosses and creches and signs and stuff, promoting Jesus and everything on the courthouse lawn, on the state Supreme Court lawn. And everybody was just good with that. All the Republicans, they were just fine with it until the Church of Satan came along and said, no, we've got this statue, this 7-foot-tall statue of I don't even know how to pronounce it. It's Behelmatop or whatever, the god with the who is usually characterized as Satan, with a goat's head and the giant horns. We want to put this there too. This is our religion. And all of a sudden, the state of Alabama is going, whoa, maybe not such a good idea, this thing of just letting any religion. And it's turnabout is fair play. And Diane, you're absolutely right. It was a brilliant observation, and I am fully expecting that to happen. And if it doesn't, I'm agitating for it. Diane, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. Thanks for watching us on YouTube. We'll be right back. We're coming up on 48 minutes past the hour. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Hey, Governor Newsom in California just said he's rolling out a plan for moving California into the endemic phase. Keep an eye on this. I'll keep you up to date. And welcome back, Ray in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Ray, what's on your mind today?
Tom, a couple of times I've been in a position to debate with conservatives about election integrity. And I remember back a few months ago when you were talking about how mail-in ballots have like a half a dozen layers of security to them, different steps they got to take that assure that they're sound. Yeah. So I'm wondering if you could reprise that, and I'm going to be ready to take notes this time.
Yeah. Well, sure. When you first of all, in order to get a mail-in ballot, you have to be on the Secretary of State's list of eligible voters. So to register to vote, there's a layer of security there. And secondly, once you get the mail-in ballot, after you fill it out, you put it in a what's called a privacy envelope, so that people can't look through the envelope or hold it up to the mail or something and see what's on it. The ballot has at least this is how it works here in Oregon. The ballot has a code on it, so it can be tracked. It doesn't have I believe it doesn't have your name on it. I could be wrong on that, but it has a code on it. And then you have to sign the outside of the envelope that you put the security envelope into. So when your ballot arrives at the elections office, the first thing they do is your name is on the outside of the envelope along with your signature on the back. The first thing they do is pull your name up in the computer, and they have a picture, a graphic of your signature. And they look at your signature that you signed when you first registered to vote, and they look at your signature that is on the envelope. The envelope hasn't even been opened yet. They look at your signature on the envelope, and if they don't match, then that ballot goes to somebody who will contact you and say, what's going on here? If they do match, then they open the ballot and they will count the vote, assuming that, you haven't spilled ketchup all over the ballot or something. So, it's pretty straightforward. And the important thing about the signature is that while it is quite easy to fake an ID, like, one of the ways that they're trying to make vote by mail much harder, and I think that they might have done this in Texas. I know that they tried to do it in at least one of maybe they did it. They were proposing it last year in one of the southern states, is they're saying you have to send in a copy, a photostatic copy. In one of the states, they were talking about even a notarized photostatic copy of your driver's license. So to prove your identity, right, in quotes. Well, really what they're trying to do is put just another big obstacle in front of people. It's a hassle. Most people don't have a copy machine in their home. Most people are not notaries. You would have to go out and find a notary, go to your bank or whatever, and sometimes you have to pay for a notary. So, this is all BS. And most importantly, you can buy a phony ID that looks really good and is, good enough to photocopy and include with your ballot for $50 in most parts of the United States. I mean, 17-year-olds buy them all the time so they can buy liquor. You cannot easily forge a signature. Forging a signature is extremely difficult. Signatures are what's called a form of biometric identification. They're like fingerprints. Signatures do change over time slightly, but basically, your signature is your signature. And to forge your signature, for somebody else to forge your signature, is extremely difficult. It is the most secure system. Did I answer your question, Ray?
Yeah, I'm going to try to coalesce that down into 3 or 4 points. Can you recommend a link or a source that might kind of break it down for me, make it a little more simple?
Not off the top of my head. I have written about this. You might be able to Google my name in quotes and signature and ballots or something like that. It's been a couple of years since I've written about it, but I know they live out there on the internet. Ray, thanks for the call. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. The New York Times has put together just an amazing graphic where they took all the record temperatures from last year, from 2021, and put the red ones being hot and blue ones being cold, put them as little dots on a map of the United States. And it sure looks to me like what we're seeing is the collapse of the jet stream. If you watch weather shows on TV and things like that, what you see is, so very off. Well, we saw this, for example, with that cold snap last a year ago, February, where the jet stream just kind of drooled all the way down, carried Arctic air all the way down into southern Texas and northern Mexico, froze Texas up, shut down their power systems and things like that. And it's blocking the movement of air here in the Pacific Northwest, and thus we're getting these massive heat waves. I think that we all need to keep an eye on this. I've got a video about it over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out there. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Clifford in Victorville, California. Hey, Clifford, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Glad to hear from you. My name's Clifford Edward Bowen. I called you about 2 years ago. I'm 74. I'm a Vietnam-era veteran, and I'm black. I'm an independent voter. I'm an independent thinker. I used to be a Democrat, but I left them because to me, they're a bunch of cowards. Tom, I don't understand this country. You know, they say Joe Biden approval rate is 35%. Why? He's created 6.6 million jobs. GDP is gross domestic product is 5.6, which is extremely high. Okay, does inflation wipe that out? Of course it does. Inflation is not his fault. It's Donald Trump. Donald Trump said COVID was going to be nothing.
Yeah.
But and then when people started dying and everything, all the jobs shut down. You know that. I don't have to tell you that.
Clifford, what's the point you're trying to make? Is it that Joe Biden isn't getting credit for what he's done because Democratic messaging isn't good, or the media? I don't get it.
And the message is that Democrats are a bunch of sissies. They should be. Barack Obama said it right. He had a meeting. He said,
I get it.
Things you've done.
I get it. No, they need to be beating the drum. I'm with you, Clifford. I'm absolutely with you, and probably as upset as you are. I really want the Democrats to start bragging about what they've been doing, because they've been doing a lot of really good stuff. Thank you, Clifford. Mark in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Tom, I sure appreciate your political and social activism. And your guests. I was touched by Reverend Barber this morning, and the woman who called in about not hurting to reach out with kindness to anyone there. And I'm actually at Sandia Park behind the mountains in Albuquerque. We've got about 6 inches of new snow, and came across a car slid off the road, and a man walking about 300 yards below it, like maybe he's walking into town. I stopped for him, and he said, she's okay. She's in the car waiting for someone. And you're about the 5th person that has stopped for me to ask if I needed help.
Isn't that great?
You know, there's a lot of kindness. There's a lot of kindness left in the world, Tom.
There is.
And I know that we both appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome, Mark, and thank you for highlighting that. I think that this is one of the most unheralded aspects of America. Yeah, we focus so much on the wackadoodles with their guns and their rants and their black flags and stuff. But the reality is the vast majority of Americans are good, decent people who care about each other, who care about their neighbors, who want the country to work, who want people to be safe, who want their kids to do well. I mean, I think that's the shared humanity of 99.9% of us. Mark, thank you. That was just a perfect punctuation point for the hour. We'll be back on the other side of this break as we roll along. Are you feeling COVID safer? I've got some interesting news for you from the Associated Press. And as I mentioned, Governor Newsom in California is like, okay, we're going to get ready. And also why the Supreme Court needs to be expanded to be saved.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, how the death of privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten us and our democracy, by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at CozyEarth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmannReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at dinovite.com.
We take life back!
Book today is Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence by Kristen Godsey. And this is from the introduction titled, You Might Be Suffering from Capitalism. The argument of this book can be summed up succinctly. Unregulated capitalism is bad for women. And if we adopt some ideas from socialism, women will have better lives. If done properly, socialism leads to economic independence, better labor conditions, better work-family balance, and yes, even better sex. Finding a way into a better future requires learning from the mistakes of the past, including a thoughtful assessment of the history of 20th century state socialism in Eastern Europe. That's it. If you like the idea of such outcomes, then come along for an exploration of how we might change things. If you're dubious because you don't understand why capitalism as an economic system is uniquely bad for women, and if you doubt that there could ever be anything good about socialism, this short treatise will provide some illumination. If you don't give a whit about women's lives because you're a gynophobic right-wing internet troll, save your money and go back to your parents' basement right now. This isn't the book for you. Of course, some might argue that unregulated capitalism sucks for almost everyone, but I want to focus on how capitalism disproportionately harms women. Competitive labor markets discriminate against those whose reproductive biology makes them primarily responsible for childbearing. Today, this means humans who get pink hats in the hospital and the letter F next to the name on their birth certificate, as if we've already failed by not coming into the world as a boy. Competitive labor markets also devalue those expected to be the primary caregivers of children. Although societal attitudes have evolved in this regard, our idealization of motherhood means that most of us still believe that baby needs mama, a whole lot more than papa, at least until the child is old enough to play sports. Others will argue that unregulated capitalism is not bad for all women. Yes, for those women lucky enough to sit at the top of the income distribution, the system works pretty well. Although women at the executive level still face gender pay gaps and remain underrepresented in leadership positions, on the whole, things aren't too shabby for the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world. Of course, sexual harassment still hinders progress, even for those at the top, and too many women believe that if you want to run with the big dogs, you may have to suck it up and ignore the groping and unwanted advances. And race plays an important role as well. White women do a lot better in aggregate than do women of color. But when we look at society as a whole, on average, women are comparatively worse off in countries where markets are less encumbered by regulation, taxation, and public enterprises than they are in nations where state revenues support greater levels of redistribution and larger social safety nets. Choose your data source, and you find the same story. Unemployment and poverty plague women with children. Employers discriminate against women without children because they might have them in the future. In the United States in 2013, women over the age of 65 suffered from poverty at much greater rates than men and dominated those in the category of extreme poverty. Globally, women face higher rates of economic deprivation. Women are often the last to be hired and the first to be fired in cyclical downturns. And when they do find employment, bosses pay them less than men. When states need to slash government spending on education, health care, or old age pensions, mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives must pick up the slack, diverting their energy to care for the young, the sick, and the elderly. Capitalism thrives on women's unpaid labor in the home because women's care work supports lower taxes. Lower taxes mean higher profits for those already at the top of the income ladder, mostly men. But capitalism was not always so savage. Throughout much of the 20th century, state socialism presented an existential challenge to the worst excesses of the free market. The threat posed by Marxist ideologies forced Western governments to expand social safety nets to protect workers from the unpredictable but inevitable booms and busts of the capitalist economy. After the Berlin Wall fell, many celebrated the triumph of the West, consigning socialist ideas to the dustbin of history. But for all its faults, state socialism provided an important foil for capitalism. It was in response to a global discourse of social and economic rights, a discourse that appealed not only to the progressive populations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but also to many men and women in Europe and Western Europe and North America, that politicians agreed to improve working conditions for wage laborers, as well as to create social programs for children, the poor, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled, mitigating exploitation and the growth of income inequality. Although there were important antecedents in the 1980s, once state socialism collapsed, capitalism shook off the constraints of market regulation and income redistribution. Without the looming threat of a rival superpower, the last 30 years of global neoliberalism have witnessed a rapid shriveling of social programs that protect citizens from cyclical instability and financial crises, and reduce the vast inequality of economic outcomes between those at the top and those at the bottom of the income distribution. For much of the 20th century, Western capitalist countries also endeavored to outdo the East European countries in terms of women's rights, fueling progressive social change. For example, the state socialists in the USSR and Eastern Europe were so successful at giving women economic opportunities outside the home that initially, for the 2 decades after the end of World War II, women's wage work was conflated with the evils of communism. The American way of life meant male breadwinners and female homemakers. But slowly, socialist championing of women's emancipation began to chip away at the Leave It to Beaver ideal. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 spurred American leaders to rethink the costs of maintaining traditional gender roles. They feared the state socialists enjoyed an advantage in technological development, and why women have better sex under socialism.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So, are you feeling safe with regard to Omicron? Is it your sense that maybe this thing is over? You know, we had this false alarm I think it was July, maybe it was August. I'm pretty sure it was July of last year when President Biden came out and said, hey, it's Freedom Day. It was right around July 4th, in fact, now that I recall. And, we thought, okay, it's like, the horror show is over, and then came Delta, and then came Omicron, and then came, oh my God. Well, here we are, a little short of a year later, 3 months short anyway. March, April, May, June, July, 4th. Okay, we're a half a year later. and now, this fascinating reporting in the Associated Press, AP News, Carla Johnson is the reporter. The opening paragraph kind of says the whole thing. The Omicron wave that assaulted the United States this winter also bolstered our defenses, leaving enough protection against the coronavirus that future spikes will likely require much less, if any, dramatic disruption to society. And what they're talking about is that we are getting close to what may be necessary for herd immunity with COVID. Even though the many Americans have not been infected, the best estimate is that about 80 million Americans have already been infected one way or another with COVID. Now, the giant catcher or kicker here, or catch, for all this, is that if you get COVID, nobody knows how long that immunity lasts, right? We are in the midst of this giant epidemiological experiment to find out. But nobody knows. And there are lots and lots of cases of people who got the original COVID, and then Delta came along and they got COVID all over again. Or they got Delta and then they got Omicron. Or they got, whatever. COVID appears to be more like its cousin, the common cold, which is also a coronavirus. It appears to be more like the common cold than like, for example, measles, or mumps, or smallpox, where you get it once and you got immunity for the rest of your life. That is definitely not the case here. But what we don't know is Is getting COVID enough to keep you immune for 6 months, for a year, for 2 years, for 3 years? We just don't know. And if it turns out that it's less than a year, I mean, we know now that the vaccines are only good for about 6 months, and maybe even only 4 months, which might mean that we end up needing to get 3 shots a year, or at least 2 shots a year. I mean, I know that they're still debating all that right now, but they are saying a 4th shot if you're immune compromised. They haven't yet said a 4th shot if you're over 65, but I'm guessing that pretty soon that's going to be coming down the road, because we're coming up on the time when the early adopters, the people who got shots early on, are now, probably 4 or 5 months out from their last booster. I know I got mine in October, so I'm thinking, I should probably get another booster pretty soon. And I'm largely waiting for March or April for that, just to make sure. But the bottom line here is that between all the people who've gotten vaccinations, and that's, fully vaccinated with boosters, I think it's around 56% of Americans, and at least 1 shot is around 70% of Americans, if I'm remembering the numbers correctly. When actually, here it is, 73%. That in addition to that, you've got Americans who have had an infection, even if they never got a shot at all, and they have some immunity from that. This is what scientists who deal with viruses and vaccines refer to as herd immunity. Now, we had with the Trump administration this wackadoodle doctor, Ronnie, what's his name? The Trump's, they called him Dr. Feelgood in the White House because he would pass out sleeping pills, and I don't know if he was passing out pain pills or not, but he was passing out sleeping pills and sedatives and tranquilizers and all kinds of stuff to anybody who wanted them. And in fact, somebody recently tweeted a picture of him, just crashed out on the floor, looking rather stoned himself. He was talking about how we just need to get everybody in America infected so we can have herd immunity. And the problem, of course, with that was this was before there was a vaccine. And if everybody in America had gotten infected, we would have had probably between 3 and 4 million deaths. We're going to have 1 million deaths anyway. In fact, let me just go to trumpdeathtoll.org and see what our current, the trumpdeathtoll.org number right now is 928,518, which is pretty grim stuff. But what they're saying is, and COVID is still extremely dangerous. We're averaging right now about 130,000 infections a day. We're averaging around 2,000 deaths a day. The vast majority of them being people who are people who are unvaccinated, and the small minority of them being people who were vaccinated but had serious comorbidities, or they were on steroids, or they were on immune suppressive drugs, so the vaccine basically didn't take. But when you look at these numbers, this is scientists at the Johns Hopkins, this is from the AP story, right? Scientists at Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health estimate that about 3 out of 4 people in the United States will have been infected by Omicron by the end of this surge. That's pretty mind-boggling. That includes, a lot of vaccinated people who get Omicron, don't even know that they had it in most cases. If you're vaccinated and you're exposed to Omicron, you may test positive for a week. You may be contagious, but you don't have any symptoms, or you have very mild symptoms like a sore throat. On the other hand, I had a caller a couple days ago who was vaccinated, boosted, and in good health, got COVID. Don't know if it's Omicron or Delta, and it just knocked them on their tailbone. I mean, just boom. They survived it. They don't seem to have long COVID. And then, of course, there's the long COVID problem. And we don't know how that plays out. And we don't know what role Omicron plays in that. And we don't know for sure whether vaccines will prevent that. I got my newsletter from Amy Vanderpool a couple of days ago. I think it was on Sunday. The Shero newsletter, S-H-E-R-O, like hero, S-H-E, hero, And it's a wonderful newsletter. I encourage you to subscribe to it. I think Amy's doing great work. But in her newsletter, she was talking about how she has long COVID. And it's so hard for her to even get the newsletter together. In fact, she said, she wrote, "I'm crying as I type these words." It just broke my heart. So, we've got to be very, very careful of this thing. Particularly if you're over 65, if you have diabetes, if you have, chronic lung problems, if you're on any kind of immune suppressive drugs, whether it's for psoriasis or arthritis or COPD or whatever. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of drugs that are used that suppress the immune system that therefore put you at higher risk of getting sick. So with that huge caveat, and noting, as they do in this AP story, that 80 million Americans are still unvaccinated and thus vulnerable to, who have not yet contracted COVID, and thus vulnerable to a next wave. They're saying, the 26% of Americans who could still get Omicron right now have to be very, very careful. What we are seeing is state after state saying, okay, we're going to get back to normal. And I got to tell you how I'm feeling about this. And, I'm not a doctor and I'm not offering advice to anybody. I'm just telling you my perspective. I'm curious to hear yours. And that is that when I've had another booster, a couple weeks after I've had another booster, so that because I'm reading all this stuff about how after 4 months the boosters have faded by as much as 70%. So I'm not feeling completely safe right now. Here we are in February. By March, I will definitely not be feeling safe since I got my booster in October. But a couple weeks after I've had my next booster, and I've never had Omicron, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to feel fine going into the restaurants here in Portland. And there's a website that compiles a list of these, but OpenTable even has now a little click box. I only want to go to restaurants that require proof of vaccination to get in. And those are the only kinds of restaurants that I will patronize going forward. But there's a bunch of them in town, and some of them are really great restaurants. I am really looking forward to going back and having a meal in a restaurant and having a drink with dinner and, all that kind of stuff that is just like, the old, and Louise and I, it's what little recreation has been left to us, right? And so I'm looking forward to this thing winding down. Here in Oregon, our mask-free date has been set as April 1st. Governor Kate Brown has come out recently and said, we may do this earlier than that because we're probably going to be one of the last states in the union to still have a mask mandate. As I mentioned earlier, Governor Newsom, we don't have the details yet, but Governor Newsom has announced that he is going to be announcing that California is going to transition into we're now in the post-COVID phase. The big challenge that people like Governor Newsom and Governor Brown here in Oregon have is the hospitals. We could say tomorrow, we've got herd immunity for all practical purposes. It's not spreading as badly as it was. I mean, it still is, right? 130,000 infections a day. It's still a big deal. But by and large, among the vaccinated community and among the people who have already had infections, in their minds, this pandemic is pretty much over. And yes, we're going to continue to have, particularly in rural areas, people getting sick and dying from COVID. But let's get past the surge in the hospital right now, which is the tail end of the Delta and the Omicron surge. And that's probably going to resolve itself in about a month because the hospitals and the hospitalizations and deaths tend to follow the illness or the wave hitting the state, tend to follow them by about a month. And thus my March-April prognostication that, we're looking at seriously getting back to normal. And I think that's like something that we should celebrate, that we should give Joe Biden a hell of a lot of credit for. When he came into office, there was no plan in place to vaccinate everybody in the United States. Donald Trump left him a complete disaster. Yeah, Trump started Operation Warp Speed, which got us one vaccine, the Moderna vaccine. But the Pfizer vaccine, which appears to be the gold standard, came out of Germany. Biden has done an amazing job, just an amazing job in this country, and really deserves credit for it. So, anyhow, bottom line here, how are you going to be treating this? Your thoughts on that? And the other thing is we want to get kids vaccinated. The pulling the vaccine on the 2 to 5 year olds, that was a blow. Particularly for those of us with children or grandchildren.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So I think I was kind of all over the place with that rant, but there's really a lot of considerations. This is a multifactorial thing. Stick around. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Marty in Blowing Rock, North Carolina. Hey, Marty, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Well, I was just wondering, now that Mitch McConnell has crawled out of his shell and is trying to actually regain control of the Senate from the followers of Trumple-Thin-Skin.
Yeah. Trumple-Thin-Skin, I love it. I've never heard that one before.
Yeah, and the insurrection party. Do you think that should Mitch prevail, would Donald retaliate by trying to go third party, you know, like the Green Party? I guess he'd call it the Orange Party.
I hope so. I would love to see that, because third parties, you know, we are one of only 7 advanced democracies in the world that have what's called first past the post, winner take all elections. In other words, basically, they're also called plurality elections. It's whoever gets the most votes gets the office. Every other country in the world has it set up so, you know, everybody votes for the party or sometimes for the candidate, but typically for the party, and then knowing who the party's nominee is going to be. And so if the Green Party gets 10% of the vote, they get 10% of the seats in Parliament. If you know, the Democrats got 40% of the vote, they get 40% of the seats in Congress, that kind of thing. Those parliamentary systems have been since the 1860s, really. There were 5 democracies in 1861 when John Stuart Mill wrote about this kind of a system in On Liberty, in his book On Liberty. And most other countries have done that. We haven't. And because of that, we're forced into this 2-party system. And whenever a third party emerges, it always does damage to the party that's most closely philosophically aligned to it. So in the United States, if Donald Trump was to start a third party, that third party would siphon off Republican votes, and it would decrease the power of the Republican Party. So I say, bring it on, Donald. What do you think, Marty?
Oh, that's what I was hoping would happen. And, you know, back to the COVID thing, you know, I have a pulmonologist friend who comes up here, brings his horses up to ride in the summertime, just to decompress. He told me that a year ago, when they had the first incarnation of the virus, he said he's the last doctor that they see before they go on a ventilator.
Ouch.
He said that first year, 4 out of 5 of his patients did recover. But he did say that with Delta, 4 out of 5 of his patients died.
Wow.
So, you know, that's, you know, pretty mind-boggling, I think. So I am so glad that we're dealing with the Omicron now, because, you know, it does seem to be more like a common cold. And but we still have so many people dying, because I live in a tourist area, and we have all these people from Florida, you know, just the DeSantis people, and Tennessee, and they come up here and they shop in our stores and eat in our restaurants, and they don't wear masks.
Yeah.
And you know,
it's a tough one. And Omicron, just to be clear, Marty, and I hate to have to say this every time, but Omicron is just like all the other coronaviruses in terms of the damage it'll do to your heart, your kidneys, your eyes, your liver, your brain. What it doesn't do, compared to all the other ones that preceded it, is it doesn't set up housekeeping in your lungs. And the lungs are so vulnerable, and that's why your pulmonologist friend was seeing those. But Omicron is not the common cold. It's still COVID, and it can still be very deadly. Marty, I got to run, but thank you for the call. And I'm sorry to hear about your visitors. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, remember Andrew Wheeler? He was this coal lobbyist that Donald Trump plucked out of obscurity and put in charge of our nation's Environmental Protection Agency. He was the EPA administrator. He's the guy who said there was this new pesticide they wanted to bring to market. It causes permanent brain damage in children. He said, that's fine. Put it in the food supply. He's the guy who raised the levels of mercury and radiation to which children can be exposed. He's the guy who closed down the EPA's Office on Children's Health. He's the guy who shut down the EPA's office that provides scientific advice to Congress. He's the guy who stopped enforcing the Clean Water Rule so that the polluters could have a field day. He's the guy who told the oil and gas companies, hey, we're no problem on methane. We're no longer going to enforce the legal limits. And of course, he's the guy who ditched the rule that required cleaning up toxic coal ash. He is now the Secretary of Natural Resources for the state of Virginia. And he's got that job because Virginia just elected a Republican governor. There's a video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And just wanted to check and see. Oh, yeah, the Supreme Court. Gorsuch. This is bizarre. I'm just going to tell you this quick story, and then I'll pick up your phone calls here. Back in October of last year, a group of New York teachers, now these were right-wingers among the New York teachers, sued against the New York City and the state's vaccine mandate for teachers. And because Sonia Sotomayor is each one of the Supreme Court justices is sort of the head of a particular district court, and she was the head of that one that involves New York State. And so it went to her, and she said, nah, not going to hear it. Then after that, a group in Indiana, at Indiana University, a group of people there wanted to block the university from having a vaccine mandate. And so they took it to Amy Coney Barrett and said, vaccine mandate bad. And she said, no, we're not going to hear your challenge either. So they lost twice. So now the New York teachers are back at it, and they're doing it in a whole brand new way. And what they're saying is it's about religion. And it looks like Gorsuch is probably going to go along with this. I mean, this is totally bizarre. Gorsuch had written an 8-page scathing dissent in the Maine case, where a group of people from Maine had come before the court, and the court said no. But there were 3 dissents. It was Gorsuch, Thomas, and Alito. And what he said was that people who lack a religious exemption, quote, are now being fired and their practices shuttered, all for adhering to their constitutionally protected religious beliefs. Their plight is worthy of our attention. In other words, if you believe, this was a Catholic group that didn't want to use the shots because they said that it was done with stem cells from aborted fetuses, which, by the way, is not true. But, you know, they thought that it was true, and Gorsuch was like, hey, if they believe that, that's their religious belief. They should be allowed to have a vaccine exemption. So now the New York teachers are back, but this time they're trying to do the shadow docket thing. They're trying to do let's go around the court. Let's just go to one justice. They tried it with Amy Coney Barrett. It didn't work. They tried it with Sotomayor. It didn't work. Now they're going to Gorsuch, but instead of saying it's unconstitutional or we don't like the mandate, now they're saying we have a religious right as teachers to not have to get a vaccine. And stay tuned, but it looks like Gorsuch is probably going to say, okay, good with me. This is the Catholic health workers. So he has referred this to the full court. Stay tuned.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Nothing else. This is proof that we need to add a few justices to the Supreme Court and force them to follow the judicial code of conduct, of ethical conduct. Reading today from Truth in Our Times by David E. McCraw, Deputy General Counsel of the New York Times, the #2 lawyer for the New York Times. This is in Chapter 1, titled Election Day. It opens with a tweet from Donald Trump. The failing New York Times has been wrong about me from the very beginning. Sadly, I would lose the primaries. Oh, said I would lose the primaries on the general election. Fake news. November 8, 2016. At 10 p.m., I made one last circuit of the newsroom. Our CEO, Mark Thompson, stood near the political desk, looking on with his wife and a small group of others connected somehow to the Times. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan remained in doubt, but the reality was sinking in. Donald Trump was on the verge of winning the American presidency. I'd been in newsrooms on election nights before. I know how it's supposed to be. The only thing that ever mattered was the horse race, think Gore-Bush, or the historic moment, think Obama-McCain. There was no investment in which candidate was winning. He or she was destined to disappoint in the long run. And the dominant emotion was a certain not quite cynical detachment amid the electric buzz of the vote count and projections and the anticipation of relief that the endless push of the campaign was finally over. Sure, you couldn't ignore the victories or the big picture moments, and the day after stories would be celebratory in their way, duly restrained, but with a nod to victory itself. Not unlike the next day account of a Super Bowl game or Game 7 of the World Series. Capture the triumph for a night or relish the race too close to call. Leave the dancing and crying for others, for the believers. But this night was like no other election night. There had been an investment, not just journalistic, but spiritual. Donald Trump had campaigned not just against Hillary Clinton, but also against the New York Times and the American press, the mainstream American press. And his astonishing rise to the top of the Republican Party had been built on his near daily attacks on facts, on the very idea that facts matter. For journalists who approach truth like a secular religion and who have seen 1,000 times how a single true story could gut the political career of a lying politician, it had been a year of faith-shaking disbelief. A line had not just been crossed, but obliterated. The shock was palpable as the numbers came in, laced for some with the fading hope for a different outcome among people who generally wanted nothing more than a story worth telling. And there was still a paper to put out, a reckoning to account for. It was too much on an already long night. I slipped away. At the elevators, I ran into Sue Craig and a guy who was obviously not from the Times. Sue had broken one of the biggest stories of the campaign. She was the one who went to her mailbox one day in September and found pages from Donald Trump's tax returns in an envelope. She introduced me to her acquaintance. He had once worked for Trump. I didn't ask why he was there. Like me, Sue had decided to get away. It's too weird here, she said. We all got on the elevator. Sue, who had written a devastating story about Trump, me, whose letter to Trump's lawyers had lit up the internet for a week in October, and one of Trump's guys. We rode in silence, a strange tableau on the strangest night of the year. 14 hours earlier, as I came into the building, the Times security guard had called me over. They wanted to make sure I knew about the plans for the next morning. In the quirky ways that things happen at the Times, I had become the lawyer to see for all the things that security guys encountered, from the intruder who pilfered women's shoes to the anonymous letter weaponized with razor blades. The Times was printing thousands of extra newspapers, and tables were going to be set up outside for all the people who would be showing up to buy the New York Times for posterity's sake. The headline, I later learned, was going to read, Madam President. We had been caught flat-footed 8 years earlier when Barack Obama had made history. By the time I arrived for work early in the morning of the 2008 election, the line was already starting to snake down the sidewalk. Soon there were hundreds of Obama supporters who thought, and why wouldn't they, that the place to buy a copy of the New York Times was surely at the New York Times. Lots of things happen at the Times building. Selling newspapers is not one of them. Employees were pressed into emergency duty to cart bundles of newspapers from the Times printing plant in Queens, and the long lines outside the building stretched on into the afternoon. But it was Obama's victory in 2012 that was on my mind this morning. I vote in a neighborhood that is predominantly black and middle class. In 2012, following a drumbeat of stories about how Republicans hoped to suppress voter turnout, I walked into my polling place at a local school 8 minutes after it opened. The line already extended back to the schoolhouse door. Did y'all sleep here, a guy wanted to know as he stepped into the foyer. On this morning in 2016, I had arrived before dawn. I was the only one in line at my precinct's table. That all seemed like a strangely distant memory as midnight approached. I had made my escape from the building with Sue and the Trump guy. At home, I sat alone in the glow of the TV screens as the states that mattered fell into place for the Republicans. I turned it off. Donald Trump was about to become president of the United States. The next morning, in a light drizzle on a gray November day, the newspaper sales tables were set up outside the building as planned. No one stopped. The vendors sat idly amid the stacks. There was no Madam President front page. Instead, the headline read, "Trump triumphs," and the first 2 paragraphs of the lead story talked about how the vote threatened convulsions throughout the country and made an early mention of those who had watched with alarm the rise of Trump. Nearly half the country had voted for the man. I had just spent a weekend in October back in rural Illinois, in my hometown, and for a moment I allowed myself to see the coverage through the eyes of the rest of America, where, at least for this one night, his victory represented a certain kind of hope that change was going to come at last. Truth in Our Times by David McCraw. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Hey, just wanted to flag for you this amazing study that came out of the Department of Global Public Health at the University of Bergen in Norway. Lars Fadnes is the professor who oversaw it. They took a massive database of millions and millions of people all around the world, and the goal was to look at life expectancy. And they were looking at everything from pollution to wars to poverty to diet. And because there was so much data and such a large population base, they were able to separate out individual pieces. And what they found, and just looking at the diet piece of this, what they found was that going with what you and I might call the Mediterranean diet, they don't call it that in the study. What they basically say is no red meat, very little dairy, lots of fish, nuts, legumes as the principal protein sources, and lots and lots and lots of fresh fruits and veggies would add 10 years of lifespan to the typical 20-year-old and 8 years of lifespan to the typical 60-year-old. The whole video about it is over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour, and boy, a lot on our plate here today. Kat in Vashon, Washington. Hey, Kat, what's up?
Yeah, hey, Tom. I'm sure I'm not typical, but it's my little part of the story. I'm on immunotherapy right now, and I got my vaccines and boosters prior to starting it. But I'm still on lockdown like it was day one because... For me, if I got, Omicron, which my understanding is it's 99% of all cases now, so I don't think there really is any Delta left. Maybe I'm wrong there, but I would just go into a cytokine storm. I have too much immunity because of the immunotherapy I'm on. It would send me the other direction, the other direction.
And that cytokine storm, that overreaction to the immune system is one of the things. I mean, it's one of the reasons they're giving people steroids when they get COVID to slow down their immune system, because the immune reaction can be what makes you so sick or kills you.
Exactly. And I've got, because I'm out here in the boonies, I've got steroids on hand because I'd have to take those immediately just to get to the hospital, which for me would be, hours. Yeah. So that's really scary. So my family's all over the map as far as being anti-vax, vax. Some of them have had the original COVID. Some of them have had the crossover. Some of them have had the flu combined with.
We're looking at the same thing. I mean, one of my brothers is going on a vacation to Mexico, I think, in a week or so. Our son was just diving in Alaska a couple of weeks ago. We have friends who recently went to Egypt. We got some other friends who are planning a cruise in a couple of weeks. I mean, it's like, wow, people are getting back to normal, and Louise and I are still in lockdown essentially. We haven't changed in 2 years.
That's what I've heard. It's come down to not whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated. It's come down to your risk tolerance. Yeah. And ours, I mean, we're not unhealthy, but we are older than, middle age. And that, to me, is kind of a flag. So, Kat, thank you for the call, and thanks for weighing in. It's nice to hear from you. Chuck in Gary, Indiana. Hey, Chuck, what's up?
Not much, Tom. How are you today?
Good. What's on your mind?
Hey, so you and I probably disagree with about 90% of our views, but the one thing that I totally agree with you on is the National Agency for Voting. There should be some kind of bipartisan where
or nonpartisan.
Agree upon. I'm sorry. Yeah, nonpartisan. Sorry about that. Where an agency that totally runs the voting and for all of national elections and everything like that.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead.
The other question I had is, what are your thoughts on term limits for the House and the Senate?
Term limits are an idea that right-wing billionaires and big corporations have been pushing for a long, long time. They're more generally embraced among Republicans than Democrats because they haven't figured out what the con is here. Here's the problem, Chuck. When a politician is newly elected, you're brand new elected to the Indiana state legislature, for example, and the way that we know this, by the way, is because there are 8 or 9 states that have term limits for their legislatures, and this problem that I'm about to describe to you has appeared in huge proportion in all of those states. So you're a brand new politician. You just got elected to the Indiana legislature, and let's say that Indiana has a 4-year term limit or a 6-year term limit. So when you come into office, you want somebody to be your mentor. You want somebody not just to show you where the bathroom is, but to give you the real inside scoop on who can get things done, who do you go to if you've got problems with this or that, who's a real expert on this issue, who understands how to write a bill so that it's bulletproof, how you get past this particular lobbyist. How do all these? I mean, there's just a million details to being a legislator. And the problem is that there's no institutional memory. The longest anybody who's in that same legislature with you has been around is 6 years if you've got 6-year term limits. And so, this is like a disaster, right? And so what has remained in our hypothetical Indiana as a permanent infrastructure is not the legislators, it's the lobbyists. You've got lobbyists who've been there for 30 years. You got lobbyists who've been there for 40 years. And the lobbyists will take the new legislators under their wing and say, let me show you how things work. Here's what you do. And what it does is it makes legislators far more vulnerable to lobbying, basically. And that's not a healthy thing for a democracy. And we've seen this over and over in those places that have put into place term limits. Now, I get term limits for a court. I understand that. That's a completely different thing. And they would be much longer, maybe 20, 25-year term limits. And I get the 8 years for a president. We could debate that. But in terms of legislation, I think it's a mistake. Back to you, Chuck.
I think I was thinking for the legislation, not so much of the 6 or 8 years, but more of your 16 or 20 years, because I totally agree that you need those seasoned politicians in there to helping guide the freshmen that come in through the door and everything like that. Yeah. But I was just, as an impression, to get rid of the 30, the 40, the 50-year-old 40-year politicians that have made it a career and everything like that.
But sometimes we do the glib answer, Chuck, when people ask about term limits, is the glib answer is, yeah, we have term limits in the United States. They're called elections. And if somebody has been reelected over and over again for 30 or 40 years, they must be doing something right.
Okay. Yeah, that's a fair point.
Okay.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
I agree.
Thanks a lot for the call, Chuck.
Thank you for your time.
Great to hear from, in particular, great to hear from somebody who disagrees with me 90% of the time. Call again and tell me what we disagree about. I love talking about that kind of stuff. Alejandro in Miami. Hey, Alejandro, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I haven't talked in a while. How are you doing?
I'm great. Nice to hear from you, Alejandro. What's on your mind?
Well, obviously about the pandemic, obviously, yes, I do agree that maybe it's too early to put our guard down with regard to COVID-19. I just wanted, to share, my personal health situation, to better inform my opinion here, right? Mm-hmm. So I vaccinated and boosted, and I guess I'm really lucky that I have not contracted COVID at all. The only thing I've contracted in the last 2 years is everything else but COVID, like a common cold or a stomach virus, because I have a daughter. You can see why that happens.
Yeah, we got a cold from our 3-year-old grandson, but it wasn't COVID, so I get it.
And then lucky enough, But both my wife and I are vaccinated and boosted, and I haven't gotten sick yet. Unfortunately, my wife got COVID in December because she works at a nursing home, so you can imagine how much contagion could be in that place.
Yeah.
So with the vulnerable
patients. Is she okay?
No, she was fine. It was barely anything for her.
Good.
But I assume it was like barely a cold for her, and that's because I assume because she's boosted.
Right.
A friend of hers, a coworker of hers who did get sick, who wasn't boosted, was more sick.
Yeah.
And she was already vaccinated, but she wasn't boosted. So, I definitely think it was great that she, was boosted because it barely, nothing really happened to her. And we didn't get sick. Myself and my daughter, we never got COVID from her, from anyone else. So I think that, we're
or if you
great.
did, you didn't get symptomatic, right? I'm assuming you weren't testing yourself every other day. So Alejandro, when are you going to go out in the world? What is your metric for this thing is over?
The thing is, I've been doing a lot of regular stuff. I mean, I know you'd be horrified, but I've been going to restaurants at least since, like last year, 2020,
Wow.
but I have not recently. Yeah, I've gone to restaurants, and I know that my mother-in-law, who's a doctor, doesn't like that sometimes because, she thinks I'm crazy. But that's that's the only thing I like to do is like go to a restaurant.
Down there in Miami, do you have restaurants that require proof of vaccination to get in like we do here in Portland?
No way. I don't think the governor, I've not heard of a restaurant that requires it, and I think that they would be scared to do it because our governor would like pounce on them saying, no, vaccine passport. So,
Fox News would be all over it, right? Now, we've got, there's probably 30 of them. I know it was in the mid-20s, maybe a month ago, the last time I looked. Restaurants here in Portland that are like, we're checking ID at the door, and by that, it's the COVID shot. Alejandro, great to hear from you. Thanks for sharing your story. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Taking back the mainstream media 3 days a week, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week right here. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Oh, I had a caller who'd been sitting on hold for 40 minutes, and I was going to go to them next, and they just hung up. How about that? Ari, and my apologies to those of you who have been on hold for so long. Ari, but it's been a busy day. Ari in Eureka, California, you're on the air. What's up, Ari?
Hi, Tom. You're a small-town shopkeeper reporting in.
Cool.
I'm usually a big fan of Governor Newsom, but I think he lifted the mask mandate way too soon. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you that 100% of the people who came in my front door over the past 2 days with a mask on were vaccinated. And 100% of the people who came in my front door without a mask on were not vaccinated.
Oh, my.
It's a big problem.
So what are you doing about it?
I let people curse at me, and I encourage them to leave.
Wow. So you've got a mask mandate for your store, basically, is the bottom line here.
And a vaccine mandate. If you want to come in and shop, you need to show me your vaccination card. If you don't want to show me your vaccination card, we serve you at the front counter.
Wow. I tip my hat to you, Ari. That's a brave stance. Are you getting, beyond the people who are pissed off and yelling at you, are you getting anything more consequential than that? Are you concerned? Is it an annoyance or a problem?
It's an annoyance. It's just an annoyance. I mean, our demographic is older anyway, mm-hmm. So it's not like, I've got some crazy person who's going to try and beat us up.
Yeah.
But, I want to keep my staff safe. I want to keep my other customers safe, especially since we do skew to an older demographic. And my vaccinated customers routinely thank me for being so careful.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. When we go back to restaurants and vaccine-only restaurants, I intend to make a big deal about it. Thank you so much for this, and we really appreciate it and all that. All right, thanks for the update.
That feedback helps.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't understand why the rush to take masks off. I'm going to wear my mask forever in crowds.
Yeah, I get it.
It's like, why are we rushing?
I get it. And completely agree. All right, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. Earl in Hyde Park, Illinois. Hey, Earl, what's up?
Hi, John. Thanks for taking my call, buddy.
And I appreciate Ari. I agree with her. And I also wanted to say that to all the vaccine deniers and COVID deniers, that there's a new strain out there, Tom, unfortunately. And you mentioned earlier in the program, about the measles being as infectious as it was. Mm-hmm. Well, this new vaccine, this new virus is right now is potentially as infectious as the measles. And
are you talking about the Omicron D2 version?
Right. Yeah. Right. And I am thoroughly disgusted with our population as far as this thing being politicized about the mask and your identity thing that's going on, that my rights are being curtailed or something if I wear a mask. Right. So Trump has done really a disservice to America, and I hope that this D2 whatever virus is not as contagious as they think it is, and keep going on promoting the vaccine and all the other things, and no mask wearing. I'm in favor of all of that. Thank you again.
I'll do it, Earl. Thank you. Thanks for your 2 cents here. It's appreciated. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So you remember the administration originally said that we're going to give 4 free COVID tests to every household in America. And you can do that, get them delivered by the post office for free by going to covidtests.gov, covidtests.gov. But they said that they're not going to provide free test kits to people on Medicare. Instead, you have to go to covidtest.gov and get your 4 free test kits. Well, they have rethought this. This is a brand new policy. And this will be the first time that Medicare covers free over-the-counter tests of any kind for people who are, or offers free over-the-counter tests for anybody who's on Medicare. The pharmacy, Medicare pays the pharmacy direct, and you pick it up from your pharmacy. So just an FYI on that. And there are a few other dimensions that have to do with TRICARE and a few other things. We've got a video about it that's over at thomhartmann.com that you can check out. Welcome back. Tony in Lakewood, Colorado. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today? And thanks for your patience. Tom, I really appreciate it.
I'm glad to be able to talk to you today. I know it's radio, so I want to keep this short and sweet. Long-time listener, and I'm 73 years old and have had a lot of experience both with political activism and spirituality. Mm-hmm. And regarding that woman talking about kindness, I wanted to throw this idea out there. I found both of them to be a little bit ineffective for me, and so about a dozen years ago, I created what I call my SMILE program. And of course, you have to use a little bit of discernment, but what that is every day I make a commitment to have a positive, apolitical, authentic conversation or interaction of some sort with an individual who is obviously different than I am, or, just anyone, Mm-hmm. And it's just absolutely stunning, some of the reactions that I've gotten from that. And I would encourage any and all of our listeners to just give it a try, because the resolution of this is going to come from the grassroots up. I don't think we can really depend much on the politicians doing anything. So I could go on I'm in the process of writing a book about it. I don't want to take up too much time talking about it, but you get the general idea.
I love it.
Get out there. Yeah, it's just the most fascinating thing. And the most important, one of the greatest effects of it is you only get to keep what you give away.
Yeah,
you only get to keep.
It's like that line from the Beatles song, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. Exactly. You may be old enough to remember. I don't know if you were involved in the Boy Scouts back in the 50s and 60s, but I remember that there was, there was this kind of rule that we had to follow, and my Cub Scout leader was real into this. that the do a good deed every day thing that Boy Scouts were supposed to do back then, and I'm guessing they still do now, but I think this little twist on it probably has been lost, is that the definition at that time of a good deed was something you did that benefited another person, and then here comes the caveat, the big, most important part, and they will never know that you did it. In other words, you're going out of your way to help somebody in a way that is not for glory, it's not for recognition. In fact, you're not going to get any glory or recognition. You're just going to do it. And that was imprinted on me. Now I can't even remotely claim that I'm able to do that every day or even every week. But I look for those opportunities to help people in ways that they will never know that they've been helped. And it sounds like you're doing something very, very analogous to that with your effort to reach out and give people a smile and uplift them in non-political, non-confrontational ways every single day. It just reminds me of the Boy Scout motto.
I wish you could see the shock I've seen on people's faces when they realize that it's a good thing with no strings attached. It's just such a blessing. And I encourage all of our listeners to go out there and give it a try.
There you go.
You just start at the beginning and go for it. You know, you don't have to write anybody or do anything. Just go out in the world.
Yep, I'm with you. I love it. Tony, thank you very much for the call. Bob in Tetonia, Idaho. Am I saying that right, Bob?
Tetonia, here in Teton County, Idaho.
Oh, yeah.
Next door to Hall, Wyoming.
Yep.
Where it's a beautiful, sunny afternoon, plenty cold. So in the Post-Register newspaper in Idaho Falls yesterday, they had a front-page article about how the repressive party of Idaho wants to adopt the southern part of Oregon and a little bit of Northern California.
Oh, I know all about it.
They need to join the conservative reactionaries here in Idaho. Now, I will tell you that Teton County, as well as over in Sun Valley and one other, is blue, a Democrat. Mm-hmm. All of our county commissioners and so forth are all Democrats. So, and then on the Noon News today, they had a repeat of the same article, kind of in depth on the Idaho Falls News, which, by the way, all of the TV here in Idaho is owned by one company. They own all three channels.
See, that would have been illegal before 1996. That's incredible.
Yeah, well, the Spencer Broadcasting has all the radio stations, and they do the reactionary talk radio.
All right wing all the time.
But you're not going to be part of Idaho. You're in Portland, and you're too liberal for us.
You're right. I know, but they've been trying to get this thing on ballots, and it's all over the place. Bob, I got to run. I just have 40 seconds here, and AJ's been on hold for a half hour. AJ, my apologies. You get the last 30 seconds here.
Oh, great. I'm going to make it quick. Long-time listener, Tom. I just want to say thank you for what you do. With COVID, I work in a market setting, and I am not done with COVID. I live in California. I am not thrilled with Newsom taking the masks away. It is way too early. Just to cut it real short, my doctor basically put me out for a month and a half, and because I have a high-risk dad at home with pulmonary issues, so we've got to really do something different here. I got to travel up to Oregon last year for the first time in 2 years because I felt safe, but now I don't know when I'm going to be able to do that.
Yeah,
but
I get it. AJ, I think we're of the same mind. I'm sorry, I do have to run now. It's the end of the show, but thank you so much for calling and for holding. And thank you for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time, same place. In the meantime, get out there and get active. There's so much that can be done. Democracy is not a spectator sport. It needs you. Tag you're it. Have a great afternoon. Be good. Be safe. This thing isn't over yet. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmanReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.